Committee to order. Thank you all for joining us for the Super Bowl of Budgets, the FY23 Budget Workshop meeting. I have asked the administration to stop calling this Budget Saturday. It's now officially just the Budget Workshop, because we're never going back to a Saturday. Yeah. So although we are in person tonight, members of the public who do wish to view the meeting may use the ActonTV's YouTube channel that's found at the top of our agenda. As an FYI, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. I would like to note that because the focus of this meeting is the FY23 budget, comments on items that are not on this agenda will be welcomed at our next meeting on March 3rd. I also want to recognize that in the past week, the committee has received several email requests regarding the renaming of the high school pool, and this is something that we intend to discuss at a committee meeting in the future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Peter for presentation number 1 on district strategy, priorities for 2023, and our alignment with the budget.
Well, first, good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I just want to take an opportunity and try and get my computer to work. Here we go. Okay, so welcome everyone. I also want to welcome members of our select board, FinCom, as well as all of the administrative team. Thank you all for being here tonight. Very much appreciated, so that if we have questions as the night progresses on either school level or departmental level functions, we can answer your questions as much as possible. I want to make sure you come out of tonight with an understanding of the financial picture of the district and how that intersects with the provision of services to students. We want to make sure that you have some sense of our strategic work and what the district will undertake through the budget to clarify and seek support for the recommended budget, and also to make sure that we give our responsibility to our community to provide insight into the resources needed to educate our students. The way we're breaking up tonight, we're going to start with a series of 3 presentations, a little bit around the district strategy and priorities for next year and how that aligns with what's in our budget requests. We're going to talk a little bit about taxing capacity and the levy limit and some of the municipal revenue considerations that we have to be thinking about in our minds. We're going to also talk about the superintendent's recommended budget and how that's shifted since our last meeting. At that point, we'll pause and be able to answer a series of questions for those first 3 presentation panels. We'll take a little bit of a break so that we can stretch. We'll come back and we'll do our finance overview and personnel, enrollment, and all-day kindergarten presentations. We'll take some more questions and another break. And then we'll do a very brief overview of kind of how the district benchmarks itself against some comparable communities, just to give you a sense of how we spend money versus some other districts. And then we will allow some time for discussion, and we're asking for 2 votes tonight. The first is going to be kindergarten tuition, and to set the rate for next year, and then also to vote a preliminary budget number moving forward. We have a couple of very brief consent agenda items at the end, and then we will adjourn. Very quick reminder, we are here on February 17th. This is now the comprehensive budget presentation. This is also the superintendent's recommended budget, and we're asking for that vote. And then again, we're asking for the vote, and the upcoming dates 1 month from tonight, we will be asking for this final school committee budget vote. So we know that the budget vote tonight, the big difference in a preliminary budget vote is once you vote the preliminary budget, the budget cannot go up. You can continue to adjust it downward, but you can't go up from the preliminary budget. So that's something important to remember as you move through the night. And then dates on town meetings are at the top of this slide. I want to start out just talking a little bit about the district strategy, and you do not need to read this slide. But if you recall, we had a series of 6 goals this year. And, as expected, 6 was ambitious given the year that we've had. But we had laid out 6 goals at the beginning of the year, and you can see where in the strategy those were designed to align. When we began with our administrative team, we actually started with a discussion of the district's goals, what we thought our students needed, and what that meant for next year. I think what we came to was that most of the goals we started, particularly around inclusive practices and equitable opportunities and outcomes, will not be 1-year goals. This is going to be several years worth of work. So we intend to have to continue most of that work forward. However, what we want to do in the next budget cycle and next year is really bring in social emotional learning as a key priority. So we're going to talk about that as we go through the meeting. School committee budget guidelines, if you remember these, I'm not going to read every single one, but it was really about making sure that we looked at our strategic plan and our goals for the coming year and aligned with that. And you had a series of ongoing initiatives. And then you also had some specific ones. And the top specific initiative was to expedite implementation of our MTSS plan. I want to share a little bit about what's included in this budget with regard to our strategy. Under inclusive practices, we've included for next year expanded leadership for DEI at the school levels. We want to provide for school-based leadership around DEI as well, and we've included money in the budget to be able to support that. We are increasing professional learning to provide and train seed leaders for each school. So we will be sending a cohort of of staff to go to seed training again this summer so that they can become leaders and then work on that anti-bias initiative at the school level. And then we're going to continue the work we're doing around coaching for leadership and school-based leadership teams focused on culturally responsive schools. And that, if you recall, is the work we're doing through the Leadership Academy. We want to make sure that continues on beyond this year. And what we'd like to do for next year is actually expand that into the schools and be able to let the coaches work with the school-based leadership teams to accelerate that work. Under equitable opportunities and outcomes, we know we are going to purchase a set of decodable texts for elementary classrooms to support the evidence-based Tier 1 early literacy instruction and literacy right through grade 6 that we're going to be doing next year. We also, as part of our MTSS work, MTSS is not just the academic side of schools, it's also the social, emotional, and behavioral side of schools. We have implemented screening tools now on the academic side, but we need to continue to build that out on the social emotional side so that we can better respond in a more proactive way to student needs. We also will be implementing a data dashboard that can bring together the social emotional and academic screening data in one place so our educators and school-based teams can use that as part of our MTSS model to identify students that may need additional support. In terms of social emotional learning, as I just mentioned, we'll be implementing the social emotional screening tool and the curriculum resources that go with that. We also have budgeted to be able to expand our responsive classroom training to get to almost all of our elementary classrooms is the goal. We know we have several that still need that training. We also want to expand and implement advisory programs at the junior high and high school and be able to provide professional learning to support that model so that it's effective. We also want to provide additional professional learning in the form of consulting and support through Jessica Minahan, who is a renowned behaviorist, to really look at, with our MTSS and ISS teams, to better identify underdeveloped skills in the social, emotional, and behavioral side of students. And then we are also providing for specific consultation services for our specialized programs to really think about developing specific strategies to improve student dysregulation that we're seeing. And then additional professional learning that we're planning, we want to support Stuart Abdon coming in to speak. He's a nationally renowned speaker that speaks to social emotional learning. He would be a keynote address for us. But then we also want to support work in trauma-informed schools and in adult SEL. So just give you a scope of what we're thinking about in terms of the work next year and what we've been budgeting for. I'm going to turn this over to Marie now to shift a little bit, and she's just going to talk about tax levy and assessments and how those are developed and the importance of considering those in this budget cycle.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. So Peter and Adam asked me to do just a brief discussion around what we mean when we talk about town being at the tax levy and how that impacts these budgets and how we interact with Acton Leadership Group and the Boxborough Leadership Forum. So I will do that briefly. So this diagram shows you sort of how all the pieces of our two towns fit together. One of the things we have going for us is that the boards in both towns and the school committee collaborate to come to a good solution that works for both towns and the school district. And so this just shows you kind of the different pieces of the 3 boards from each town, and then Acton Leadership Group and the Boxborough Leadership Forum are the groups that meet together to kind of work through getting to a balanced budget. So one of the things we've heard is we know we're making cuts. It's a difficult budget season for us. Couldn't we just ask the towns for more money? Couldn't we just use more ARPA? So as we look at that, we have said that Acton is at the levy limit, and so for anyone who may not be from around here, what that means is Massachusetts has something called Proposition 2.5. Taxes are limited in how much they can increase. The limit is called the levy limit. So any given city or town has a tax levy limit. That tax levy limit can increase by 2.5% per year, plus any new growth that comes into that community. Acton is at the levy limit. Boxborough is below the levy limit. But if we brought forward a budget that exceeded the levy limit, the only way that you could do that would be if you went for an override for the town. And an override requires a town meeting approval and then an approval at the ballot box. And the consensus has been that an override is not something that's feasible in the near future, both based on the amount of reserves we have, based on what it takes to get it passed. So the ALG plan, these numbers are based on the preliminary budget that we presented to you at the last couple of meetings, which includes the school budget going up 3.7%. To get to that 3.7%, that was a $1.7 million reduction from our initial budget. So you had seen those reductions along the way. They included several staffing positions. So we got to 3.7%, and with that, there still is a $1.7 million gap in the ALG plan. So sort of, if you put the pieces together, could we ask Acton for more money? They can't go above the tax levy. And so this shows you sort of the reserves being used, the town budget, and one of the pieces that we're working with is that the Minuteman assessment is up 36% in 1 year. It's been like this for a couple of years, and we have some more data around that, but the pie really needs to pay for the municipal budget, the Minuteman assessment, and the Acton Boxborough assessment. So the money has to come from sort of one of these places. So what can we do to balance the budget? We either need to reduce expenses, increase revenues, or use more reserves. As we said, the budget we've been presenting, the preliminary budget, already had 1.7 million reductions. Tonight, you're going to see a presentation that includes another $1 million of reductions, basically $500,000 reducing expenses and $500,000 using more reserves. This is just to tell you that as we've developed these budgets and we come back with updated presentations for you, we're really trying to balance reducing ongoing expenses with using one-time reserves. And it really is a balance, and it's hard to find the really right place with that. But if we solve the whole problem by depleting E&D, by the town depleting free cash, and by using grant money, then it gives us a much bigger problem next year and the year after. So what we're showing you tonight, we're hoping is a good balance between reducing ongoing expenses. It's hard to reduce staff. My budget is the HR budget. It's very difficult to do that, but that's really the only way to lower your expenses in any ongoing kind of way. So the other question we get is, what's the difference between the budget and the assessment? So the assessment is really what the two towns pay. The way that we get there is we start with our budget. That includes our expenses. Then we have revenues and reserves that reduce what the towns have to pay. But revenues may or may not keep up with expenses. And so that gives us a preliminary assessment. Once we have the preliminary assessment, then we look to the two towns, we calculate the enrollment from both towns, and then the assessment is based on a 3-year average rolling enrollment. So the next slide is going to put numbers to that. So this is the preliminary budget. $103.4 million, or 3.69% increase. The revenues are 18.2 million. I believe that was something like a 1.8% increase. So the expenses are up 3.7%. Revenues are only up 1.8%. That already causes the assessment to be higher than the budget. The reserves in the preliminary budget were 1.3 million, leaving an assessment of 84 million, or a 3.4% increase. Acton and Boxborough enrollment are changing disproportionately. So the Acton enrollment is going down at a faster rate than the Boxborough enrollment is either going down or up. So in this one budget, there's a 0.2% shift from the Acton assessment to the Boxborough assessment because of changes in numbers of students in the last 3 years. And we have some other info about that coming up. So with a 3.69% budget, the Acton assessment is up 4.36%, and the Boxborough assessment is up 5.8%. I think there's one number on here that's wrong, which is the ABRSD assessment. I think that might be after additional cuts. I think it was 4.4. I think that should say 4.4. Okay, Peter.
So, you know, looking at what we've done so far, we've gone through 3 different versions of a preliminary budget to get more feedback and think about how to hone that. So what we're doing tonight is shifting from a preliminary budget to what we're recommending for a vote to you tonight. The bottom line that we have is the requests of our district and what we've presented to school committee to date exceed the town's ability to pay for that. So we know that we're going to have to do some different things as we move forward. What we're going to do tonight is present a budget that further reduces the assessments to the communities by a total of $955,000. That is about $500,000 in reductions to the operating budget and an increased use of reserves of about $455,000. So that's the plan for tonight. And I want to walk you through what we're doing. The overall picture is what we're presenting is an increase of 3.19% on the operating budget, which is down from 3.69. So we're cutting 0.5% on the operating budget. That results in an Acton assessment of 3.18% and a Boxborough assessment of 4.59. So you can see how those assessments have come down from previous iterations. There were 3 strategies that we're using to close this gap. 1 is further staffing reductions. 2 is recommend the second all-day case scenario instead of option 4. The third is to increase the use of reserves. In terms of staffing reductions, just to be clear, since last meeting, we have restored the district DEI position as a director level position, and we've restored the elementary special education position. In addition, though, we have further reduced staffing. We've reduced 1 junior high teacher, which is a physical education position, a 0.2 high school teacher, which is just a part-time position that won't be filled next year, a half of a junior high clerical position, and roughly 7 elementary classroom assistants. This is the same level of assistant funding that we talked about at the last meeting when we got to try to get to tuition-free all-day K, but the difference is we still have to reduce them, but we can't get tuition-free all-day K. That's the reality of this budget. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. This is still what we've talked about, but we don't get the all-day K credit in addition to this. Just to walk through, now I'm going to back up a little bit and paint the big picture. Overall in this budget, we've had some staffing additions, which include the urgent and strategic additions we've talked to you previously about. Those are the 1.0 FTE Elementary Special Education Coordinator, and that is designed to allow schools with substantial programs to move to full-time coordinators in the building instead of part-time coordinators. It also adds a literacy coach for Miriam McCarthy Town Elementary Schools, which, as you recall, was the top strategic priority for FY23 as through the school committee budget guidelines. It also adds an English language educator that we need in order to be able to meet required minutes for English language education. In addition, there are some other staffing shifts within this budget. There is a conversion of 2 FTE library assistants to certified librarians. There's a cost to that. It does not change the FTE of the district because the people exist and we just have to shift them. We're opening a brand new elementary school with a beautiful library that is actually the center of that school. We really need to have a certified librarian running that elementary school library. So that's critically important. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to move that program forward. We also are restoring a pre-K assistant to the operating budget that was previously funded through the revolving account. That is because we have depleted revolving accounts as a result of the pandemic, and that position has to shift back into the budget. And then in addition, in order to make the shift to even to option 2 of the all-day K program, we have to move 3 or the equivalent of 3 teaching positions from costs that were paid through the tuition revolving account into the operating budget. So when you see additional 7 FTE, 3 of those for kindergarten are not new positions. They're just being shifted in the operating budget from revolving to the actual appropriated budget. I just want to be clear about that. In terms of reductions, the budget we're presenting tonight reduces 27.6 positions from the district. We are converting an assistant superintendent position to a director of DEI. Doesn't change the FTE, but there's a cost savings associated with that. We're reducing 3.2 positions at the high school, 1 position at the junior high, 14.4 elementary classroom assistants, which is the equivalent of 2 grade levels, 3 bus drivers, 1 security staff, 1 operations ground staff, half of a capital projects manager, 1 high school clerical staff, which is a combination of 2 part-time positions, and half of a junior high clerical staff. In addition, we just want to note 2 positions in special education are being shifted from the operating budget to a grant. The positions are not being reduced, but the funding for them shifts to grant funding. That's why we just want to make sure for people who like to add up the columns, it still gets to 27. So total net change in FTE, we are going down by almost 21 positions going into next year's budget. All right, and that's where we stand as of today. That was the first strategy, was through staff reductions. The second strategy is to recommend to you that we use the second option for all-day K tuition. That does accelerate the reduction of all-day K tuition to $1,800 per year for families, as opposed to what we had originally planned at $3,750. So it's better than what we had, but it's not as where we want it to end. It does not allow us to get to tuition-free all-day K next year. It does add $180,000 to the budget, and it will mean that we would use approximately $500,000 of ARPA money over the next 3 years to be able to offset that. The reason we're recommending that, we simply do not have the funds available without significant additional reductions to the budget. We cannot budget based on ARPA funds that we don't have committed to us. We can't come to you reasonably with a proposal to use funds that we don't have and haven't been committed. We don't believe that that's in our scope of responsibility to do that. It does have some implications for the further use of ARPA funds. We've received messages that there is an interest in seeing how we choose to use our ARPA funds before we talk about committing additional ARPA funds or possibly using additional ARPA funds. So that's certainly something that was on our minds. We do believe as an administrative team that further staff reductions to the budget is too significant in light of pandemic recovery We do not want to reduce additional staff moving into the next budget cycle in order just to get to all-day K. And then further use of reserves or grants, if we choose to use those, what we're really doing is we're creating a cliff for ourselves in a future year, because we're going to have to make up whatever money is different. And that we don't want to have a problem next year that we create for ourselves this year. The third strategy we're recommending forward is the additional use of reserves. We're recommending using $300,000 from the capital stabilization account. $200,000 of that is actually interest that's been earned on the $1 million fund balance. An additional $100,000 would be directly from that fund. So a total of $300,000 from capital stabilization, and then the use of an additional $255,000 from E&D, and that would bring our total use of E&D to a level $1.5 million. We currently just received the other day a certified E&D for $3.2 million. We do not know yet what our turnbacks will be at the end of this year. It's just too early in the budget cycle. So again, the recommended budget is a 3.19% budget for tonight. That results in assessments of 3.18% to Acton and 4.59% to Boxborough. Give you a little history of what we've done. What was requested initially, internally, would have resulted in a 4.71% increase. We came forward to you through our preliminary process at a 3.69% increase, and by reducing $1.7 million from the budget and a combination of additional reserves. And then since then, moving into February, we've reduced an additional $1 million from the budget and applied reserves to get to a 3.19% budget that we're recommending. To go back to Marie's chart, from how does this break down to the assessments? Revenues have stayed flat, so there's no additional money coming in revenues, but we have increased the use of reserves. So that gets our assessment to $83 million, and you can see how that breaks down to the two towns. Where does this fall with the ALG plan? And again, we're bringing up the ALG plan because that is the one community that we have that is at the levy limit and we cannot exceed it. So what this brings us to is still close to an $800,000 gap. We have an ALG meeting tomorrow morning, and we're going to have to work through that process with the town and the FinCom to figure out a strategy to close that. But what we're recommending tonight, knowing that the preliminary budget you vote cannot go up, but it can come down before the final budget, we're still recommending that 3.19% budget for tonight. So we want to pause there and be able to take questions for anything from panels 1 through, well, they're not really panels tonight, they're just presentations, but presentations 1 through 3, and just give an opportunity to debrief that a little bit.
Thanks, Peter. Okay. Tessa?
Why are we having to use 44% more of our reserves and Acton's are going down by 20%? Their reserve usage was on that. They reduced their reserve usage from 1 point something million to $1 million, and ours went up 44%. The last two lines, or the second to last two lines.
Do you want me to?
I don't know as though we can give you that firm answer as to what that is, but this is where we're at right now. I mean, we can't speak for the town, but Marie, maybe you can talk to the ALG plan.
I mean, I was just going to say, I don't think it's final yet. I mean, that's just where we are in the process. And we're meeting tomorrow morning, so we'll see. There may be some changes to either the budget or the reserve use.
I think the town has been looking at their budget in the period as well. We just don't have any updates from them yet.
Other questions or comments? Amy?
I don't really have much to say except that this is a real bummer.
Peter, I know you mentioned that the staff reductions, you were hoping to be able to make them with people who were sort of leaving the district already. Has that largely been the case with the exception of the teaching assistants?
Some, yes, and then as we've had to go deeper, no. You know, as, you know, we had kind of gotten to a place that we felt we could probably do through attrition in that first round, and then as we've had to go deeper, no, we've had to actually start talking to staff and say that, you know, we're making reductions, and this could be a position that is in your purview.
Yevon.
So to follow up Tessa's question, basically, the town and the school district has a 1.8 million deficit, but right now, Peter, you just proposed the latest update is school district already made an effort to cut 1 million, right, to meet the 1.8 gap, right? So if the town make also similar level of effort like the district does, then that $0.8 million should go away, basically, right? 0.8 million deficit. Is that we can anticipate?
Yeah, you know, I think it's hard to, I really can't speak for where the town is at. I don't have an update that's really recent from them. I think tomorrow morning is the place where we'll have a deeper understanding of kind of where the town is at in the budgeting process and different ideas that come forward. We did receive a little bit of good information that it sounds like the Minuteman assessment has come down a little bit. So that's good. I still think it's 30%, but it's not 36%, so some improvement.
Got another question? So for the school, for the all-day kindergarten, so the revenue, we still charge, right? Even with the option 2, that's $1,800 a year. So that's based on that, we're going to generate some revenue estimate, Marie generated. So do you consider, based on the assumption, say here is the number of a student is going to be enrolled in the all-day K is going to be the same as last year. So do you taking into account, say maybe with we lower the rate, probably more students will come in?
Yeah, but I think we're going to talk more in detail on all-day K when we get to presentation number 4.
Yeah,
So-
I just wanted to understand the assumptions while we come up with the numbers.
Yeah, I actually think Marie probably will get to some of that in the presentation for all-day K. So if we can just hold that, it's a good question, but if we can come back to it, that will keep us moving.
With respect to the levy limit discussion and the 2.5% limit, my sort of rule of thumb has been that 2.5 limit, because of new growth and other factors, tends to turn into a number like 3%, which is fully sustainable over time. And of course, that's sort of where, you know, we're trying to get to in FY23 is that 3% number. Looking forward to FY24 and FY25, do you think that you know, sort of 3% guideline will apply? And, you know, I offer also as the comment that living within, you know, a 3% number is possible if inflation is 1 or 2%, and is not a happening thing if inflation is 4 or 5%.
I think 3% next year is going to be a challenge. Again, I think, you know, probably the two major budget drivers we have in this version of the budget that we're presenting tonight are healthcare and all-day kindergarten, right? So those still will be the two major budget drivers for us. Healthcare, I don't think was a one-year problem. I think it's going to take us a couple years to correct. And so my gut tells me, and from preliminary information we've gotten from the trust, is we probably should anticipate another 10% increase in healthcare next year. So right there, that would be roughly $500,000 that we start off with as a consideration that we have to have in the next budget. That's 0.5% alone. So I think that's going to be a challenge as we look at next year. So, you know, for that reason alone, I would say I think 3% will be another challenge.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Amy.
Just a clarification. So the assistance that you presented here in the recommended budget, is 2 grade levels, not 1. Was that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's 2
Thanks.
grade levels.
Okay. Let's keep this train moving. We're 15 minutes ahead of schedule already. Any last questions on presentations 1 through 3? All right. We do have in the agenda now a break, so let's take a quick break. I'm going to try and keep us ahead of schedule. So it's 6:36 right now, seeing as we've only been seated for 30 minutes. Let's take 10 minutes and come back at 6:45, please. Thank you. Thanks for keeping to the time. So we are going to move forward with presentation number 3, which is the finance overview.
Okay, thank you. So this is slide 41. I guess I'm going to end at slide 53. Just want to set expectations appropriately before I start. And who's, Peter has it, okay. I apologize for any lack of clarity. It looks, this one looks big enough. There was some problems potentially with the pictures transitioning from PowerPoint to Google, so I'll try and point out things that didn't come out well. My lengthy budget memo is in the binder, so I'm not going to rehash that material in this presentation. What this is intended to be is more graphic and pretty much one slide per topic. I'll point out items of interest and allow you to digest what you're seeing and either answer questions as I go, because these are, in a lot of cases, one-off topics, or not sure if we want to hold questions to the end. But I guess what I would say is if something comes up,
We're going to hold the questions till the end.
we're going to hold the questions till the end. So just rewind the tape, delete what I just said, and we'll move on. The total recommended budget, $102,900,000. That's the total pie. The slices of that pie represent the funding sources, and you can see them listed and shaded in colors of various proportions. The two in blue and red, the red you can barely see, but state aid and other revenues make up about a quarter of the pie, and they have been increasing slowly of late, and by of late for several years. We've had to rely on an increasing amount of district reserves, which is the green slice. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. And you see the Acton and Boxborough assessments in their proportion relative to each town's enrollment. The growth of the pie, in other words, how much is spent by the district, equals the growth of all the sources. It's got to. The sources have to equal the uses. And so recognizing that equilibrium, if the revenues and reserves don't keep pace with the rate of budget growth, then the assessments pick up the slack. So to wit, we have a growth of about 3.2% of the total pie. Revenues and reserves are less than 3%, and so the assessment share, the total assessment, is 3.4%. Just need to, it's a reminder, but I'm told that sometimes we need these reminders because, unlike me, you don't all deal with this stuff on a daily basis. So, relating to reserves, take a look at this slide. The red bars indicate reserves used, and the scale is millions of dollars. There were a couple of anomalies in 18 and 19 to fund the feasibility study and to initially fund the capital stabilization fund. Otherwise, the trend, as you can see, is of greater use of reserves. The green bars represent the total reserves on hand, and by reserves, I mean not just E&D reserve, but the two stabilization funds that have developed, the capital stabilization and transportation stabilization, as well as circuit breaker reserve. So all of those things are represented by the green bars, which you can see the trend there. That is on the left scale, again, in millions. I'm not a colorist. I think the other bar is purple. I'm going to call it purple, and that's the percent of next year's budget represented by the reserves, and that, the scale is in percent, and it's the same scale, but it's in percentages. If you look at the purple and green together then, it shows, in my view, continued financial strength of the district. And as I believe Marie mentioned, we just got our E&D certified, so that number, which I had anticipated in this slide, but before the certification, it came in on target. And I should note that in showing the 22 bars, the green and the purple, we're projecting close to break even with 21 with reserves, just for discussion purposes for that slide. In the next slide, everything here is expressed as a percent change from the prior year. And so the operating budget trend, the green line, shows some stability after the first year or two since full regionalization, and it's in the 3% range, plus or minus, in the most recent years. The budget increase is the blue line, and the total assessment is the red line. They generally track each other, except the extent by which revenue growth is different from budget growth, as I just explained a minute ago. And so you can see that in the 18 to 20 range, the blue line, or the budget increase, was greater than the red line, or the assessment increase, because we had stronger revenue growth in those years relative to the budget. But since 21 and 22 and 23, the red line is higher than the blue line, meaning that we haven't had as much in the way of revenues and reserves to defray the budget, and so a greater share needed to be funded by the assessment. Obviously, the big spike in FY21 is missing the note that appears on the next slide, which will be corrected as soon as we go to the next slide. The big spike is here as well, and that's obviously the first year of the new school debt, the first year of debt of the new schools, I should say. This is the annual assessment change from year to year for the total assessment, and broken down between Acton and Boxborough. The assessment, reminder, the assessment is allocated to the towns based on the average enrollment by community for the previous 3 years, for the 3 years prior to when the assessment is calculated. Looking at the graph and trying to see if there is any correlation between budget and who's who and all, just a quick fun fact about FY23, where we have a recommended budget increase of 3.19% and an Acton assessment increase of 3.18%. That's a coincidence. The budget of 3.19%, but being funded by less than that for revenues and reserves, results in the total assessment being 3.4%. The proportion between Acton and Boxborough is what ultimately drives Acton's down to 3.18 and Boxborough's to 4.59. If you look at the slide, you can see that the effect of the cost shift, more specifically the sunset of the cost shift, for historians of the regionalization, it was a manner of overriding the means by which the assessment was calculated. And so from FY16 through FY20 on this slide, you can see that the Acton increase is greater than the total increase, and certainly a lot greater than the Boxborough increase. And that's because as the appendix to the regional agreement worked its way through, the cost shift, which was fairly significant in the early years of full regionalization, were eliminated over time, to the point where from 21 to 23 on this chart, the assessment now is completely based on enrollment. There aren't any artificial adjustments made. And you can see that the trend, which had favored Boxborough as far as the annual assessment increase through FY21, has now flipped. And because of enrollment trends, Boxborough's assessment for the last couple of years, and as we'll see anticipated going forward, is expected to be higher than Acton's and higher than the total. Also point out that the period from 18 to 20, for a 3-year running average, the Boxborough assessment increase was flat. This is one of several slides with both left and right scales, no pun intended. There are two separate presentations here, so the intersection between the two lines, don't pay attention to that, it's not significant. In any fiscal year, if you add up the value of the percent on the left scale, which is Acton, and the right scale, which is Boxborough, you'll get 100% of the assessment. What is significant is if the trend continues, and per our consultants' enrollment projections, it will, the 3-year average enrollment changes will result in, averages I should say, will result in lower proportions to Acton and higher to Boxborough. We've been predicting this for about 5 years now, and this is a slide repeated from last year. I noticed nothing that would make me change it in this year's enrollment numbers. Just to further provide some backup for why both towns are being assessed what they are, here are the actual K-12 projections out 5 more years from now. FY23 is in the middle. The total enrollment appears at or near the end of a period of decline. That's the top of the stacked bars, and entering one of moderation. It's perhaps a little bit hard to see due to the scale. Boxborough is a little easier to see because their blue bar is you can capture the shape of it going forward. Boxborough's increasing slightly and Acton is decreasing slightly. And so again, not to belabor it, but Boxborough's share is expected to go up. And while the numbers did not appear at the bottom when we converted the slide, the Acton share, which you can read that, but the numbers aren't there. The Acton share is projected to go from 84.6 back in FY19 to, if the numbers hold true, 80.3 in FY28. That's a significant change in enrollment and therefore cost between the two towns. This slide is also repeated from last year. Ultimately, just want you to recognize that we have an increase to our capital expenditure in this year's budget. It was anticipated in this plan, which we last year called a suggested revision. In fiscal 21, you see the red bar, which is capital spending, went to zero. We zeroed out capital spending that year, and this revision is to ultimately restore the amount of capital expenditure by the end of the CIP plan. And so, if you looked at if you added up the values of all the dots on the red line, which is the new plan, and the blue dots, which is the old plan, you'll still get to the $33 million amount that was called for in the CIP in 2020. Note that in FY23, we've increased capital spending to $500,000 from $350,000, and it's going to continue to go up gradually after that. The CIP debt service is the green line. You can see that excuse me, declines as principal is paid off. And note that this slide doesn't include the debt service for the school buildings. This just includes the projects identified in the CIP plan. Excuse me. And one more quick reminder that there's going to be a lot of school building debt retiring soon, just like Principal Lynn Newman. Maybe not quite that soon, but you can see that the blue and yellow, which are Acton and Boxborough, and this one came out really clunky with the big fat pink bars. The next year, fiscal 24, will be the last year for Acton before $400,000 of annual debt service drops off. Boxborough school-related debt pretty much disappears by FY27. And the district's debt has the refinance debt from the senior high and junior high projects is retired in FY25, so debt service will be down by close to $2 million by the time we have the FY26 budget prepared. What remains then is the debt service for the Douglas Gates School. A couple of slides about a few of the more significant budget drivers. This one looks like a bunch of crazy lines. It tells a bit of a story. We're trying in one slide to give insights into why health insurance costs have changed, and I note that John Pearson has done a great job of keeping the school committee informed during his chairmanship of the Health Insurance Trust and has provided a lot more detail. Again, this is to just give an overview. Participation, which is the green line and the scale on the right-hand side, generally increases, and the rate, which is the blue line and scaled on the left as a percent, has been all over the place. It was over 10% shortly after full regionalization. It bottomed out at a 5% decrease in FY19, and we're back to 10% for FY23. I think it's possible that in hindsight, had we set a constant 4% annual rate, which is the average over the period, the overall numbers for the cost and the reserve balance might be about the same as where we are. But we didn't, and so now we're dealing with 10% increases to both employees and the district and, as a matter of fact, the town of Acton. The Health Insurance Trust balance, which is the red line, peaked in FY18, right about the time that we decided that they decided that a rate reduction was in order, right about the time that costs increased pretty dramatically, and so as a result, fund balance has declined pretty substantially. The scale is on the right in on the left, I'm sorry, in millions, and so we went from being, I think technically we could say overfunded, to in a position where the fund balance is such that the trustees want to rectify it and turn that around, or at least stop it from deteriorating further. So with this, I'm not sure if Peter really reviewed my slides because he's left in one each for MCRS and OPEB. So as you digest this, understand that there are two items of note as I review it, and note again, there are two scales. The one on the left is in millions of, they're both in millions of dollars, but the district's contribution, which is the blue line, you can see has gone from a little over 2 million to closing in on 3.5 million in a 6-year period of time. That's the assessment from Middlesex County, and that is projected to go up at 6.5% per year. The unfunded liability, or what the district owes Middlesex County, relative to the value of assets, so the red line, which is the liability, versus the green line, which is how much the district has to its credit at MCRS, you'll note that those two lines diverged in 2018, and this is meaningful because when we get to 2020, the value of the assets exceeds the remaining unfunded liability, meaning that we are past 50% funded. That's an important milestone because it is, and there have been some setbacks in rates of return of the system, but the green line, which is the value of the assets, that's going up pretty steeply. The red line, or the unfunded liability, is not going up as steeply. The unfunded liability will at some point go down when the assets start to grow even faster. Why do they grow? Well, it grows from the significant contribution that we make. So in 2020, we paid almost $3.5 million, and they grow because of the earnings on invested funds, which is historically about 8%. The more money to our credit in the system, the bigger an 8% return is, add on top of that the contribution, which is going up at a 6.5% rate, and you see that the projection for full funding of 2037, which isn't that far away when you come to think about it, it's next decade, is possible. And that's something that we, as a district, should keep an eye on, because as we get closer, it will present some opportunities for strategic budgeting. And speaking of OPEB, I won't start by asking what is OPEB and giving an answer, just giving you a reminder that Middlesex County, the previous slide, is pensions for non-certified employees. OPEB is health insurance contribution, a 50% share for retirees. Okay, so this is health insurance for retirees, actuarially valued as to the liability in today's dollars. The district started to modestly contribute to the OPEB trust. You can see that with the blue line. The scale is on the left in thousands. We topped out at $900,000 a year by FY18 and continued that for a couple more years. The green and the red line are similar to what we just showed on the previous schedule. The red line represents the unfunded liability, and the green line represents the value of assets. We're not close to the crossover point yet. We're not close to 50% yet. But at 16% funded, the district is way ahead of most in Massachusetts for sure, even though there are still, actuarially anyway, 30 to 40 more years until full funding of OPEB. Similarly, the value of the assets grows by virtue of $900,000 annual contribution, plus the earnings on investments, which as they continue to get higher, we're up to $9 million at the end of June 2021. There's a greater acceleration of that balance. And lastly, let's talk about Chapter 70. There's one piece of data that unifies all districts when determining Chapter 70 aid, which is the main state contribution to public school districts. It unifies all the districts, and that is enrollment. Acton Boxborough's enrollment, the blue line using the scale on the left, has been declining. You may have heard that. To determine Chapter 70 aid, the state takes enrollment, multiplies it by cost rates for categories in the foundation budget. It comes up with a grand total foundation budget for each district, the minimum required for an adequate education as defined. Subtracting the district's required share to fund that minimum locally, the difference is called foundation aid, and that is here in the red line, and you can see that foundation aid just kind of meanders along, and it hasn't really grown much. Let's leave off 23 for a second, but between 16 and 22 on this slide, foundation aid hasn't done much. It can fluctuate based on enrollment. Well, you can see that enrollment has been going down. It can fluctuate based on inflation rates. Inflation has been up and down during that period. It can also fluctuate based on the required local contribution, which we won't get into here. But the amount of foundation aid has pretty much stagnated for the period from 16 to 22. When enrollment is more or less flat from year to year, inflation increases foundation budget and thus foundation aid. So if we had seen that blue line being level, then the red line of foundation aid would have shown a slope, an increasing slope during the period. But look what happened from 22 to 23. Foundation aid increased by $1.7 million, despite a decline in enrollment. I've discussed the concept of hold harmless before and won't go into that tonight either. But if Acton Boxborough had no hold harmless, I'll just say this. So hold harmless would be the difference between foundation aid and actual Chapter 70 aid. So the foundation aid is what the formula says Acton Boxborough should get, and that's the red line there. Chapter 70 aid is what we actually got. There are two rules. You can't get less than what you got the prior year, and for the most part, you get $30 a student more. So you can see the divergence of the purple line. We've been getting slightly more Chapter 70 money every year, even though the foundation budget's been up and down. The difference between those two is what's called hold harmless aid, and that's the green line at the bottom. A district won't get any more foundation aid until hold harmless aid is gone. Hold harmless aid took a major drop from over 4 million last year to about 2.3 million for FY23. That's encouraging because we did not have level enrollment from 22 to 23. Enrollment dropped by over 100 kids. But the inflation factors that were inherent in the foundation budget formulas were so high, plus they changed the manner in which low-income students were calculated, that it resulted in a very big increase to the foundation budget, not so much of a change to the required local contribution. And so the levers there are, the purple line, we got our $30 per student. So that purple line just continues to be in a more or less horizontal manner, $30 a student more each year. The red line, foundation aid, up significantly, even though enrollment was down. The difference is the hold harmless goes down significantly. So the green line plus the red line equals the purple line. If the green line can drop to 0, and if this trend can continue, then the district would stand at some point to participate in foundation aid, the significant increases that were passed with the Student Opportunity Act in 2020. And what has to happen? We need to have moderate enrollment, and if this year is any indication, we don't have to have increasing enrollment, because even with 100 students less, we had a significant increase in the foundation budget. Inflation adjustments, and there are two pieces to that. There's general inflation, and there's the SOA inflation categories that are intended to pump more money into public education. We'll be watching this. I won't have probably anything more to say about this until next October or so at the earliest, when we look at enrollment numbers for next year. But if enrollment can flatten and the other components of the formula are favorable, then the district might be able to start participating in the SOA benefits, which, if you remember, when it first came out, I think I'm on record, I was on record as saying it looked like somewhere between 3 and 5 years before it meant something to us. Well, that was based on level enrollment. We've not had level enrollment. When we got to $4 million of hold harmless last year, I folded my tent, I put all my SOA calculations on a shelf, and I said, well, come back when it's more relevant. It's going to start to be relevant, it looks like.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay. Marie, I'm not going to penalize you the 10 minutes that Dave took out of your time. I will give you your first full 30 minutes.
You said we were 10 minutes over. I assumed that you meant Dave.
Oh, no.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so I'm going to talk about really 3 different things: staffing, enrollment, and all-day kindergarten, and then I'm going to pull them all together a little bit. So the first chart here is really the major categories that fall under human resources budget, all the salary items. And so my memo, there's lots of information in the packet. We put the memo in and it goes into more detail. Teaching salaries are, so overall, the human resources budget is up 3%. That's the lowest increase in all my time in this position, 3%. Teaching salaries are up 4.6%. The money that we're putting into all-day kindergarten is part of teaching salaries, because the way we're using the $180,000 is to move salaries for kindergarten teachers from tuition into the appropriated budget. That also includes a 2.5% cost of living increase, plus steps and lanes for teachers, and any changes in FTE for certified staff, for teachers. So it includes the 3 or 4 positions that we're adding that we'll go into more detail about, as well as the 3.2 at the high school we're reducing and the junior high position we're reducing. So those are all in that number. Other than that, the support staff salaries is down $46,000. It would have gone up about $400,000 due to the cost of living increases, but instead it's down because we reduced so many assistants, we reduced 3 bus drivers. So a lot of the positions we reduced fall under support staff. And the other thing I would point out to you is the salaries, buildings, that's buildings and grounds staff, folks that take care of the grounds and the like. We had 3 solid cuts in that area, so that's why it's down $164,000. So that reflects the grounds person cut, the security cut, and the capitals project manager halfway through the year cut. Unemployment, I point you to that for a minute. So normal unemployment, we're at about 40 to 50,000. Last year, we were at 100,000. That was what we see as a one-time COVID effect with all the changes in staffing related to COVID. So we put it back to a $50,000 more standard dollar amount. We are making quite a few cuts. A lot of them are through attrition and would not affect unemployment, but there are certainly a few that will. Peter covered a lot of what I'm going to do in the next few slides, so I'll be relatively brief, but certified staff are up 2 positions. You can see them on the list. Non-certified staff are down 23 FTE, so the total budget is down 21 FTE. This is the list. 3 bus drivers, that really after COVID, when we redid all the routes, we believe we can function with 3 fewer bus drivers. Those positions are empty this year. We do not intend to fill them next year, so that was a decent cut that we're able to take without a lot of impact. As you know, we're converting the assistant superintendent position to a director of DEI, 3.2 high school teachers. That's roughly 1 per department across 3.5 of the departments or so. That is through attrition, but it does, it's going to start to moderate class sizes a bit. One of the big ones is 14.4 FTE classroom assistants. That is the equivalent of 2 grades, or about 1/3 of our classroom assistants. It does come out to 14.4 FTE. It's $360,000. So it was both chunks of 180. What I just talked about, the next 3 cuts, significantly impact the facilities and grounds department. So it's the security manager, the capital projects manager, and a grounds person, going from 3 to 2. There are some clerical cuts, 1.0 at the high school, which is 2 part-time people. That will essentially close the faculty support center. There's a junior high teacher position, a half-time junior high clerical position, and we're moving 2 FTE special ed to grants. Total reduction, 27.6 FTE, $1.2 million of staffing cuts. We do have some additions as well. We had to move $50,000 from what was being paid for by the pre-K tuition into the budget. We do have to hire an English language educator, a special ed coordinator, for 2 of our biggest programs, and the last literacy specialist to finish that so that each school has a half-time literacy specialist. We are going to move forward with converting 2 library media assistants to certified staff and the $180,000 for all-day K. So that's the equivalent of adding 7 FTE, $591,000. So when you net it out, the net change in FTE is negative 20.6. The net reduction in staffing position costs is $638,000. This chart talks about our 3 collective bargaining units. We have the teachers, ABEA, we have office support, ABOSA, and we have our custodian and maintenance unit, which is AFSCME. All 3 are in the 3rd year of their contracts. The cost of living is 2.5% for all 3 units, as well as our support staff. You can see the historical trends there. The next slide goes back further, and this is specifically ABEA, our teachers unit. Going back to FY11, the cost of living over that period of time has averaged 1.6%. We do have steps and supermax and longevity and credits for courses that average roughly 2.5% per year. I always add those together because it's not just the cost of living. The steps and lanes have a big impact as well. And you can see what the total average salary increase has been. Over time, it's averaged 4.1%. And the health insurance rate increase column, I don't know if you can see it from there, but you can see the ups and downs since FY11. And so it was 12%, 5%, negative 3%, 10%, 9.5%, 11%, 4%. And then we started with the graph Dave showed, the years where the fund balance was high, so the rates were low. So in FY18, we had a 0, then we had a -5 and a -3, and now we're building back up to get closer to market rates. So now the last 3 years have been 4%, 7%, 10%. Averages over all that time at 5%, just under 5%, and I think you'll see going forward, we might have another year or 2 of large increases, and then it should moderate around 4 to 6%. I always give you an update on retirements. So this year we have 9 folks retiring, 9 certified folks. And it's averaged about 12 per year, so we're a little below average this year. The early retirement incentive, long story, it was in the contract for teachers. And that was sunsetted last year, was the last year that anybody got it. So we had no money in the budget this year for the early retirement incentive. We do still have a few folks who are grandfathered in under the administrator contracts. So we put $50,000 back in for administrators going forward. With all of that, when we have someone retiring and we know they're retiring and there's an incentive for folks to tell us by December 15th, we then adjust our budget. We take that person's salary out of the budget and we replace it with a master's step 3, so a 3rd-year teacher, which is what we average our new hires. So each person who retires can lower the budget by $40,000 to $50,000, and we do that as soon as we know that they're retiring. So in this budget, that was $286,000, and then if you take that, you subtract out the early retirement incentive, we have lowered this budget by $236,000 based on known retirees. All right, I'm going to switch over to enrollment projections. So the last, 3 years, we've had drop in enrollment K-12. And we had two really big drops, 155 students 2 years ago, 177 last year, and 54 this year. I have some charts that kind of show you where it is, but basically elementary has gotten to the bottom. Junior high has a little bit more to go of enrollment drop, and the high school is about halfway through, still has some dropping to go. The next slide shows the K-12 enrollment history. The vertical line shows where we are right now, and we are right about 5,000 Acton and Boxborough students in kindergarten through 12th grade. The next chart shows elementary. Again, the vertical line shows you where we are right now. Okay. And you can see we've hit the lowest for elementary, and we're starting on the way up. And we have been reducing classrooms proportionate to the enrollment drop, and we've kept up with that. Now we're going to have to start adding back a classroom, sometimes two, as the years go forward. This budget actually has one additional classroom in it, which we may or may not need to use. We'll see how many kindergartners we get when the time comes. So along with enrollment drop, like I said, we've reduced classrooms, but we've also been able to reduce class sizes. And so one of the questions I hope to answer tonight is, if enrollment has dropped, why is FTE up? And so I'm going to talk about why that is. One of the reasons is our class sizes were too large, and we wanted to get them down to within our class size guidelines. So at the elementary level, in FY10, class sizes were average 23 and a half. That's an average. We had classes with 26, 27 kids at that time. Elementary, we are now averaging 21 and a little over 21, 21 and a half. So that has come back into our class size guidelines. The junior high has dropped enrollment, is at a flat point for the next several years, and will have a couple-year drop and come back up again, and then start to grow. They did have a little blip for a couple of years. Junior high is only 2 grades, so if you have a bigger class or two, it can, make a pretty dramatic impact on the enrollment and the class size. But we are in a very flat period of time, so we went from a high of 1,000 students. Right now, we're at about 825. Right? So that's helped the class sizes quite a bit. If you look at the junior high class size on the next slide, you'll see that these go from FY13 until now. FY13, we were right around an average of 22. We went up to an average of 24. FY17, 18, 19, things were a bit bigger than we like. Because again, if the average is 24, then you have classes with 27, 28. But now we're at a comfortable class size at the junior high, just under 21. The high school is maybe 2/3 of the way down the drop in enrollment. So they peaked at about 1,950, and they're at 1,700 right now. So they're down about 250 students since 2010. And they have about 100 more students that will come down through enrollment drop. And the high school class sizes have come down quite a bit. They've come from about 22 average, lots of variation there depending on student need, but we're averaging now right around 19 and a half. And that's why we recommended cutting 3 FTE at the high school, because that's actually a little better than our class size guidelines. This chart shows all 3 levels. You've seen them in more detail. And then the next chart This shows you what has happened with our enrollment projections over the years. And we have NSDAC do our enrollment projections. In prior years, we had NSDAC and we had a local family who did it for us, the Ashtons, and I felt much more confident in those days because we had 2 sets of enrollment projections, and the Ashtons could always use the local data around housing starts and all of those things. And we were very, very consistently accurate. The enrollment projections have been kind of all over the place. The black line in the middle that says 2021 is where they are right now. I feel pretty good about these. They were definitely too low at one point and too high at another point. And, you know, we've worked with NSDAC to make sure they have all the information. But I think these are pretty close to where we're going to end up being. And all the charts before this were based on this. A question did come up earlier in the year. The new school, the Douglas Gates Early Childhood Program School was built, MSBA approved it for an enrollment of 2,820 students. Right now, the peak enrollment, which is the furthest year out we have enrollment for, is 2029, 2030, projects 2,706 students. And we have about 40 staff students. So we'll be right around 2,750, and the building was built for 2,820. And when they built the building for 2,820, they looked at all 6 schools, and they built based on total enrollment across all 6 schools. They weren't going to build, approve Douglas and Gates for some number that then left empty classrooms in other buildings. So we're feeling pretty good about, there's a little bit of capacity there, not a lot, but it's also not overbuilt based on the enrollment projections. This slide shows the change in FTE over time, and the FTE have gone up from just under 750 in 2015 to just under 850 now. You can see it's going to go down again between this year and next year based on the cuts we're making. And so I pulled some data around where were those positions added. And the next slide summarizes where the positions were added. So the biggest category is special educators. 22 special educators since FY16. And what that allowed us to do is keep a lot more kids in district. And so we very purposefully built specialized programs to keep kids closer to home and to serve them in our schools. That includes 3 Pathways classrooms, the STEP program at the junior high, the Compass SEL program, which is now K-12. There's a language-based program at Douglas, and Connections has grown quite a bit, and we have learning centers. So we've added 22 FTE in special ed in that period of time. We're meeting the needs of our most vulnerable students in an equitable way, and we are developing programs to keep them closer to home and in our schools. An example of that is that our out-of-district students has gone from 98 to 74 in that period of time. In addition to that, we had a large cohort of students coming into our elementary schools when we started Pathways. So there were 7 kids that year alone, many of whom may have ended up out of district. So we have gone from 25 elementary kids out of district to 12 elementary kids out of district. So it's a real success story, but it has increased our FTE even though we've decreased some enrollment. Other areas you'll see, special ed coordinators, English language educators, 7 in those years. They're meeting the needs of our students. BCBA, psychologists and adjustment counselors. So psychologists and adjustment counselors, 6.4. At least half of that was for our social emotional specialized program, the Compass program. And at all 3 levels, we've added adjustment counselors for that. The other big category is staffing for MTSS and curriculum support. This includes curriculum coordinators, the math specialists we added last year, the literacy coaches, and the STEAM coaches. Altogether, over that period of time, that's 15.5 FTE. So I would say there are 2 major categories where we've added FTE. It's special education and MTSS and curriculum support. If you keep going, the other thing we did is bus drivers. We went from 2 elementary tiers to 1 elementary tier. At that time, we added 7 bus drivers. We're now reducing 3 of those. So it actually moderated quite a bit. Classroom assistants, 2 major things happened with classroom assistants. The first was we had a large number of classroom assistants that were funded by extended day, community education. We moved those into the budget and used ComEd to pay for utilities instead. That was 20 FTE right there. So that was not actually adding staff, that was just paying for staff instead of utilities. But it was a 20 FTE increase. But this year, we're reducing that by 14 FTE. We have some special ed assistants, and then you can see elementary classroom teachers are down 6 in that period of time, so we have reduced classrooms, and the high school teachers are down 4.2 just last year and this year. And the last piece is roughly 10 FTE have come into the budget based on lowering kindergarten tuition. So it's what we did before with kindergarten tuition and what we're doing this year. We've moved 10 FTE from tuition into the budget. So I wanted to give you sort of the main categories. There are some other things like clerical positions that have been reduced and the like. Also, we did have a central office. We moved an administrator into central office, but we did that while at the same time we reduced 2 support staff to help pay for that. So that was one other change. All right, I have just a couple more slides. This chart shows the class sizes at all 3 levels, and you can see we've gone from averages that had classes above our class size guidelines to within our class size guidelines. The next 2 slides, you saw this before, but this year we are doing well within our class size guidelines. We do have 13 classes that are over guidelines, and you can see, you know, one of the things we try to do is not exceed 24 kids in an elementary class. In 5th and 6th grade, we do have some classrooms that have 25, but we have a total of 13 out of 122 over guidelines, and our average class size is 21.3. The state has a metric they call student-teacher ratio, and we are at exactly the state average for class size across 350 communities. If you compare that to FY15, we had classrooms of 25 in 1st grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. We had 46, about a third of our classes were over class size guidelines. The average was 22.5, and we were in the top 20% of the student-teacher ratio in the state. Just top 20% highest class sizes. One thing to consider about this budget is whether we need to add a kindergarten or not. I have put that in the budget. We may or may not need to use it. But the Boxborough projection was high at 70. We're hoping we don't have to have 4 classrooms in Boxborough, but we may need to have 15 instead of 14 in Acton. We have another month or so of kindergarten registration, so we won't know until April 1st if we need that or not. Minuteman. Minuteman is a budget driver. It's also an exciting opportunity for our students. They have opened their brand-new building and expanded their curriculum and their opportunities and programming quite a bit. As a result, we have a lot more kids going there than we had in the past. So we went from roughly 35 total kids, 35 to 40 total students at Minuteman from Acton and Boxborough. And this year we have 82. So what we're seeing is each year we're getting about 25 more kids than we had the year before. So instead of 9 kids at a grade, we're getting 35 kids at a grade. We're 2 years into that, we're gonna have 2 more years. So as the enrollment grows, the assessment to the town of Acton is gonna grow a lot, and it has grown a lot. You saw it was up 30%, 35%. One of the reasons is per pupil costs here at AB is about $16,000. At Minuteman, it's $34,000. In addition to that, their annual operating budget is going up about 20% a year. So there are 2 different drivers. It's the number of kids. It's also the increase in their operating budget. This chart shows Acton and Boxborough students over time. And I want to make sure everyone's sort of aware of what's going to happen here. So this is FY19 through FY31. The number of students from Acton is dropping. The number of students from Boxborough is increasing pretty much every year. So this year, I meant to highlight FY23. So Boxborough is going up 21 students. Acton is going down about 100 in 1 year. That's not unlike most of the future years. That will continue to shift the assessment from Acton to Boxborough, relatively speaking. So in this period of time, which is 12 years, Acton is dropping 862 students, or 19%. Boxborough is increasing 183 students, or 22%. And the assessment will follow with that. All-day kindergarten. These are the exact slides you've seen before, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through them. This year, we have 45 students in half-day, 272 students in all-day. Yeben, to answer your question, we are anticipating with lower tuition that more kids will go to full day, so we've based those projections on 290 kids. So we'll see how that goes. But right now we have 45 kids in half day, 86% of our kids are in all day. Here's the enrollment history. It's dramatically increased the number of kids in all day over time. So in 2015, half of our kids were in all day, and this year, 86% of our kids are in all day. We used to have dedicated full-day classrooms and half-day classrooms in every school. That meant we had waiting lists. We were not meeting the need. What we have now is what we call hybrid. What's good about it is every family who wants their child to have all day can have all day. What's bad about it is the kids in those classes that are in half day go home in the middle of the day, and so they're leaving their peers and their classmates. But we do have hybrid classrooms, and so the 45 half-day students are spread out across the classrooms. You've heard this a lot. There are equity issues and curriculum issues with our current model. While we do offer scholarships, and they're getting better because we do have some ARPA money for scholarships, there are still families who may stay in half-day K due to the impact of the tuition. They tend to disproportionately include EL students, economically disadvantaged students. As long as we have some students in half-day, instruction of new material is limited to the portion of the day that all students are attending. If we move to universal all-day kindergarten, that would allow teachers to introduce more new concepts in the afternoon. Hybrid, what I just said, the half-day students leave in the middle of the day, and we're one of only about 20 districts in Massachusetts that do not provide free all-day kindergarten. The original funding plan from a few years ago was to reduce tuition by $750 per year, increase the budget by $180,000 a year. We started with a little over $1 million in expenses, and we knew it would take 5 or 6 years. In FY20, the tuition was $4,500. FY21, we couldn't have all-day kindergarten because of COVID. This year, it's $3,750. So if we kept going that way, we would have ended up at $3,000 for next year. Where we are now is we have put $180,000 in this budget for all-day K tuition, which was consistent with the original plan. There are 4 scenarios. We've talked to you about all 4 of them a few times. The first one is to just go to $3,000, which was the original plan. What we are recommending in this budget is that we go to $1,800 and use $500,000 of ARPA. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then option 3 was to put it all in the budget in 1 year, and option 4 was to use a lot more ARPA. So the next 4 slides go into detail. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. The $3,000 plan, you can see we don't get to free tuition until 2027, and it's all based on $180,000 increase, $750 reduction in tuition. Scenario 2, or option 2, is the one we are recommending, as much as we would have liked to recommend option 4. So what scenario 2 does is it moves the tuition to $1,800, leaves it there for 3 years. So it's down from $3,750 to $1,800. We still put $180 in the budget every year for the next 5 years. And we use $500,000 of ARPA money spread over 3 years. So that is the plan we're going to recommend. It gets us to free tuition in FY26, but the tuition between now and then is $1,800 a year. We might do it in quarterly payments instead of monthly payments. We're working that part out. Scenario 3, we never recommended. It would have been $900,000 in the budget all at once. It would have required an additional $720,000 in cuts beyond what we're doing right now. Scenario 4 would have meant putting $400,000 in the budget right now. What we've put in is $180. We would have had to put $220 more in addition to everything we've shown you tonight. It also would have used $850,000 of ARP money, which would have is more than is available in what we're aware of. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Marie. Okay. Questions on Dave and Marie's presentations, numbers 3 and 4? Go ahead, Ginny.
Thanks. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands this, because Marie did talk about it, but most of the time that we're talking about all-day kindergarten, we only talk about it as a tuition issue. And so that could reasonably lead people to believe that this only affects all-day K students who are paying tuition or not paying tuition, but it actually impacts 100% of the kindergarten students for the reasons Marie just said. All of the content has to be delivered in the morning, the 2.5 hours that all the kindergartners were there. And that's not how anybody would recommend delivery of kindergarten curriculum based on everything I've seen and the kindergarten teachers that I've spoken to. So, you know, it's very easy to miss the fact that our failure to offer universal all-day kindergarten impacts every single one of our kindergartners. And, you know, to the extent that that is a, you know, non-best practices delivery, it can impact them going forward beyond kindergarten. And I think that that's especially important to think about in light of the fact that we've just been through a pandemic that has disproportionately impacted many families. And it can also have an impact on the ability to identify special needs at, at kids coming in and, into kindergarten. So, we could go back on why it is. We're one of the very small handful of school districts in Massachusetts that does not offer universal free all-day kindergarten. It's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. And, I'm not exactly sure why it is that option 4, I've seen what you've said. I've talked about it with some folks. But, to me, I think the town needs to understand that we cannot, we can't balance its budget on the backs of our 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and those families. And, I can't vote for this. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into it, and I understand the limitations here, but it's just, it's just not something that, that I think is ethical based on, what families have been through. And so I think that we have more work to do on that score. So if you want to say anything more about option 4 to flesh it out, I have talked to some people about it, but if there's anything else you want to do to go into detail as to why option 2 is being recommended now and option 4 is apparently off the table, I think that would benefit people to really understand, what that switch is from 2 weeks ago.
Sure, I can talk to that. So I think, we have gone back to the ARP budget and really looked hard at that. And I think, one of the things that is, glaringly obvious in this budget is we don't have enough money to fund everything we're trying to fund. And the number one need we have always had as a district for the use of ARP money was to replace revenues in the revolving accounts. As we have been able to replace revenue in revolving accounts through the different uses of ARP, that allowed us to slow an additional operating budget bleed that we would have had, particularly around utility costs that have, in custodial costs that are charged off to ComEd. And if we couldn't slow that and build up that ComEd reserve or the revolving account, then we would have to actually incorporate several $100,000 of those custodial and utility costs on top of the reductions we're proposing. So we need those revolving accounts for the next several years to be able to soften that descent. When we added up all of the money that we need in the revolving accounts to be able to continue to pay utilities and custodial costs through them, and we started to add up what we would need in ARPA to be able to pay for option 4, here, it exceeded our allocation that we have from the town of Acton. One of the challenges I think we have from an administrative standpoint, we can't come to you and recommend that you pass a budget that exceeds what we know for revenue sources, because it just can't, it can't work for us. I think it's really, really frustrating because I think we would love to be able to get to it. It's been one of my goals since I got here. It's been one of Marie's goals for a lot longer than that, and we've been trying to gradually work toward that. I think the other challenge we have is if we, just to get to where we're at, we already cut that second grade level of assistance now. If we have to get to $400,000 now in the budget, we're going to have to find several $100,000 more in addition to what now we've proposed. So there's budget increases or budget reductions that would have to take place to the tune of several $100,000. There's ARP money that just isn't available to us right now because it's not committed. I think the other challenge that we have, if we just tried to request more ARP money, that's all one-time revenue to offset something that's going to be an ongoing cost. And at some point, that bill is going to come due. I think we're worried internally about budget impact over the next several years, particularly around things, and I think John was already trying to talk to this earlier when he asked me the question about, will 3% be feasible in the next few years? But with health insurance costs going up and things like that, I worry, we've been able to do reductions at a level that Certainly, we're not providing the same services that we do today as we go into FY23, and there's some shifting that we have to make that's strategic. But if we continue along that path too long, at some point, we're really going to start to impact the programming that we want to provide for all of our students too. So it's, you know, it's a balancing act in all of it. I think it comes down in the end to the amount of money we believe we can count on is insufficient to pay for what we'd like to get to. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer. Does that get to that question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, what I think you just said 3 times, which is the allocation from the town is insufficient. I understand art money can only be, you cannot be used for, yearly expenses, but I don't understand why this is acceptable, you know, any more acceptable than if we offered, you know, half-day 5th grade to 15% of our students. So, I mean, that's the way I look at it. I think a solution needs to be had. And if that starts with the town's allocation coming up, I think people need to understand this money went to the town. It didn't go to the school district. The Board of Selectmen is in control and are telling us what we can have as a school district. And you know, I don't think that, and that's because of the way that federal law is and the way that Massachusetts municipalities and school districts are, you know, organized, and not for any other reason. So, you know, I understand that that's not our only problem, but I think it starts with the town's allocation is insufficient.
Tessa?
Add one thing to the comment. You know, and Ginny you've been deeply involved in this, but we've been trying all sorts of different funding sources too. We've tried going to the state to see what additional funding there could be. And in all honesty, advocating not just for us, but for all districts that are in a similar position. Could they reopen the all-day K grants? We've tried that. We've had conversations with federal legislators to actually think about how we can backfill extended day lost revenue and continue to bring in revenue for extended day that could then free up resources. We're really trying hard to explore a lot of different opportunities, but we're just not getting, you know, it's not just a local issue, it's also a state issue and it's a federal issue that we're just not finding the revenue sources that we think we need to get there.
I'm not going to repeat everything Jenny said, but I agree wholeheartedly. I'm not sure I can vote for a budget that doesn't include all-day K. I feel differently about it than I did 2 or 3 years ago, the last time we had a really serious discussion about this because of COVID. All these kids have missed so much. And I would wager that most of the kids that are not in full day are not in full day because they can't afford it. And it's just totally unacceptable. But one of the slides that you showed said that, because I remember that we did this, is that when we converted paying like the 20.5 assistant positions that were funded by ComEd, right? We switched it over to the utilities and all of that. And now we're reducing 14 positions. So what I'm curious about is how much did we spend towards assistance as a district, not the PTOs and not the extended day program? How much came out of our budget compared to what we're talking about? So we added 20.5 positions that year that we switched them over from ComEd, right? Is I think what that slide said. And now we're reducing at 14. So am I correct in saying that we're still 6.5 positions ahead of what we were as a district operating budget paying for? I'm not saying that they weren't positions that existed, but we weren't paying for them. PTOs
Okay,
were
in that
paying.
case, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
So we don't have more positions than we had then.
Right.
We're paying for more positions out of the appropriated budget than we were then.
Because we had.
But it was a trade with utilities, right? So we were spending that money in the utility line item, now we're spending it in the assistant line item.
Right, but because there was an unequal allocation of assistants across the district, because some schools were paying for many assistants that other schools were not paying for. So I guess my question is, what was the level of assistance, like grade level wise, at schools that were just receiving, or essentially just receiving, district budgeted assistance? you see what I'm saying? Because I think we've gotten really, really used to a level of assistant funding. I mean, you and I went back and forth about this over and over and over again about how to make it equitable. But we've gotten really used to this idea that we have all of these assistants when that's not really the case. It wasn't the case at a few schools and was the case at other schools. And so now we're saying, oh, we have to have all of these assistants, that's what's expected, that's what Acton Boxborough is. But it's not what it was. It was being paid for by PTOs and by extended day funds, correct?
Yep. So we were paying for 2 to 3 grade levels of what we have now for assistants, and then the PTOs and extended day were paying for the rest, and it was uneven by school, absolutely. So we've gone from the budget paying for 2 or 3 grades to the budget paying for all 6 grades, 12-hour assistant in every classroom. The number of assistants, the FTE of assistants only went up a little bit, but the amount that was in the line item of the budget definitely went up.
Okay, so my point is essentially back a couple of years before we made this change, we're still 6.5 FTEs over what we were originally paying for as a district.
Correct.
So there's money to be had. That's all I'm saying. Like, I would rather pay for all-day kindergarten than pay for assistants. We didn't used to be paying for assistants. People have gotten used to assistants. PTOs we're paying for assistants. I agree that there has to be more creative ways maybe to get to the all-day K, because I don't see how we can, in good conscience, move forward with our literacy work, with our MTSS work, with all of that stuff, and not have all-day kindergarten.
I have a couple different things on my mind. One is that, and I know that Dave, Marie, and Peter will not be surprised to hear me say that, I could have asked Dave a rhetorical question about which of the expenses in our budget are we going to pay for with the Boxborough assessment. With the change in the ARP rules, all of this discussion of where ARP is going is so much foolishness in my mind. This is just not the way to think about it. We have some one-time money. It's important to remember that it's one-time money. But whether you allocate it, to some kindergarten things or any other expense in the budget is just irrelevant to our discussion. So I wish that we would, not, tie revenues to expenses other than in cases where there's a legal requirement to do so, like circuit breaker can only go to one kind of activity. It just makes no sense to me to have that discussion. The second thing, with respect to all-day K and the importance thereof, to think that every student, has an important educational experience in kindergarten is, in my view, equally foolish. What happens for various children, when they're 4, 5, 6 years old varies quite a lot. And if it was critical to have certain kinds of specialized services at the kindergarten level, then it would be true that all these homeschool students would crash and burn, and they don't. So it's just not true that every student needs those services. It absolutely is true that some students desperately need those services. So when we're looking at, what we need to do to find ways to do that in a more targeted way, I think is very important. And, unfortunately in education, we cannot run randomized controlled experiments to try and decide, what is more or less important. People have tried very hard to generate longitudinal data that speaks to the question of, how various interventions play out. And, I believe that Deb and others are well aware that recently the Tennessee longitudinal study has published, another analysis talking about what the fate was of children, as a function of that kindergarten intervention. And it was found that that did not accomplish the educational purposes that, were originally hoped for. So, I don't accept that kindergarten is critical. And then the last thing is that, Peter, when I saw the budget, what I read the budget to say was, I have looked at all of the different things that we could do, and in my view, the best educational value is not provided by eliminating tuition for kindergarten, all-day K at this point in time. Because if you didn't believe that, then this is not the reason the recommendation would be up there. So obviously people have different ideas about how important this is, but you know, in my view, it is important for us in terms of meeting the budget. And as a reminder, we started off, Peter said, you know, the important thing to remember tonight is our budget can't go up from here. But I'm pretty sure there's a good chance our budget might need to go down from here. So whatever we're going to do tonight, don't think that this is the end of what we're going to have to do.
Thanks. Per what Tessa was saying, and I've got two questions actually. Would this group be amenable to allowing PTOs to again raise funds for the schools and assistance and such? No. Okay. Then let's not talk about it. I saw some key services were impacted by the cuts, and I was wondering what the plan was to cover for those roles and the ones that are to be lost. You mentioned in part the faculty services group, and I was curious, if we start removing some of the folks inside these places, what's the plan to maintain and continue to grow, especially with the thought that inflation will continue, health costs will continue, and revenue will continue to drop?
So, you know, I'm going to be honest here. In places like reducing the staff in the faculty support center at the high school, the function of that is that support center is there so that when faculty need things copied, you know, things reproduced for classes, things like that, they can bring it there. There's people who will help do that. That won't exist. The service won't be replicated. It means that teachers are taking on additional work in order to do that. That's not something we can replicate because we just won't have the staff to do it. I think that's, you know, the challenge. The grounds person that we're losing, that's a lower level of service that we need to expect, because going, you know, when you cut a third of a staffing level, that you can't replicate, you know, a third of your services with 1/3 less people, right? Capital projects manager, something like that. You know, I think we need to maintain that while the new building is coming online. I then think that's actually a fairly reasonable way that we can gradually reduce. We brought the position on when we had just bonded $10 million worth of projects and we're launching a new plan at the same time that we were building a new school. Okay, if the workload is now, you know, let's call it 93%, if I make up any number, complete, well, then that can gradually get reduced and you're not really losing service at that point. So I think it varies. Class sizes, when we start to talk about that at the high school, you know, I think we're keeping class sizes at a reasonable level educationally. And so I don't think we're decreasing educational services there. Classroom assistants, you know, that's something that you're not going to replicate what they're doing right now in classrooms. And I think you know, one of the decision points that we made about why not to go deeper with assistants, you know, I think everything we do has a balanced impact as a district. And when you know, sometimes we underestimate the web that's created through even one particular role. So for example, with assistants, it's not just about time they spend in classrooms, but assistants aren't in classrooms 12 hours every day because they're also doing lunch duty and recess duty. Part of the reason they do that is because it's a contractual obligation that teachers don't do that. So if we don't provide lunch and recess coverage, we don't have the staff to do that. And so we're going to need to maintain a certain level of that. You do need kindergarten assistants. Assistants in first grade are certainly very beneficial. Second grade potentially as well. As you get older, it's a service that we provide, but if we don't fund it, we won't provide that service. So there's no easy answer to saying, you know, that you can or can't replicate a service. I think, you know, our goal in producing this budget was to try and take a balanced approach to things and understand that as you move gradually, it allows the culture of a district and cultures of schools to evolve a little bit with it. You know, as I said before, I don't think this is the last year we're going to be making budget reductions. I think we're probably going to be in somewhat of a similar position next year. And I hope I'm wrong, but I don't know if I will be. You know, and I think that if we go really deep in one place and use so much in one-time funds to try and backfill, I think we could be in a very challenging position in the future. And that despite my desire to try and get to all-day K, I don't want to put us in a position in a future year that we're making reductions to things that we see absolutely as educationally critical. And that's my worry. I could be wrong, and I'm willing to accept that, but that's kind of the crux of my thinking right now.
And truly, your thinking is what brought my question about. And that in the same way, I worry about an entropy occurring within the staff and an entropy occurring within the services that are offered to our kids. We're in a wonderful position with a great district now. But as we start winnowing away with things that we're offering, the things that we can do, there's the potential for the quality of the district to go down simply because everybody is trying to cover for everybody else. And as we've seen over the course of this and other presentations, the revenue to the towns is not growing. The expenses to the towns is growing. And the necessity exists for us to be able to mitigate this shift and to look beyond just how do we pay for all-day K or how do we pay for the things we have to do this year, but to recognize that this is the beginning of a trend that we've got to find a way to stem.
Yeah, before I hand it over to Kira, I'll just agree with you, Andrew, and say this is the challenge in that, you know, we don't have taxing authority and we rely on our two communities to provide us funding. And, you know, our community is at the limit of what they are able to fund. And so it comes to us to make the difficult decisions to bring in a budget that is both tenable to us, but feasible to the towns.
And that's really the point, really, of what even what Ginny and Tessa were saying as well. If we place the importance in the population of our town and place the importance in the schools and what the schools do, recognizing that the schools may need more in other ways is really important, which means it might need to come from something beyond what we can talk about in here and look for other opportunities. But to impress upon the rest of the town the value of what we have inside the schools and to not try to continue an entropy to drive the schools down, to be able to afford them, will be an important part of what we do next.
So I'm just going to piggyback on what Andrew said for 1 second and just say it's not just the whole town, but I hope that our legislators and those who want to be legislators for the town of Acton are paying attention to this and are going to the State House and fighting for us and trying to fix the donut hole in which we as a regional school district live in, where I am so dependent on the town of Acton and cannot get more money from the state. So I'm so glad that you said that, but that's not what I wanted to say. So I'm gonna
I'll take it.
Very politely disagree with my good colleague, Mr. Peterson, because I started my journey to this table by using the quote, "We are a suburban school district that has urban challenges." And that is still very true. And as a matter of fact, what we've seen is a deepening of that challenge. And what we've done over these past years is invest in dealing with those challenges, as we've invested in special educators, as we've invested in English language learners, as we're trying to move to MTSS, and as we're dealing with our increasing social, emotional, I got a better word for that, challenges, right? That was just a jump before COVID, and now we have COVID. And so what we need to do now is give an investment to our youngest learners who have missed so much, just like Ginny has said. So that way we don't see the compound interest of that non-investment go through this bubble, this COVID cohort bubble that we're gonna see go through our district. So if we choose to not invest then with the screenings, with that close, gentle attention, with that time, with that stability all day for our youngest learners, we will simply see a snowballing effect as they get older. This is actually a long-term, very good investment that I think is worth fighting for. And I used the language at the last meeting about risking something big for something good. And perhaps risking the big, which is to go a little deeper on assistance, or to go back and try some other creative solution, to do this good thing by these precious babies, is the right thing to do. And you know, there are town officials in here tonight. And, you know, we've been really clear, and we're going to go to ALG tomorrow, and I'm going to be this person, first thing in the morning, about why we need the money that we need. And I'm not talking about ARPA. I'm talking about this 3.19. I'm talking about the money that we're asking for. And then we'll go fight about ARPA because I'm ready. But we need this, and this is what we need, and this is what we need now, because we should not ask the 4-year-olds, and their families to sacrifice. We shouldn't ask them for that. And I remember paying that bill, the whole bill, and going into debt to pay for kindergarten for my babies. And I do not think that we should ask families to do that during COVID. It is not fair. We should not ask 4-year-olds to do that. So if you're a person in this town and you're listening, if you're a town official and you're listening, if you're a legislator or want to be legislator for the town of Acton, Boxborough, please listen, because the limit is the limit, but the need is the need. There are no luxuries here. There are no wants here. There are needs, and we still cannot pay for them, and it's unacceptable given who we are. So, I was actually really ready to come into this meeting and swallow option 2. But the number cannot go up from here. And I wonder if that means that option 4 really is worth fighting that hard for. And I'd love to know what that means given the game. But we really should think about it a little bit harder.
Thanks, Karen.
Can I just talk a little to that?
Yes.
So just from an implication standpoint, I can't come to you and suggest that you budget more Chapter 70 aid than Dave says we're going to get, right? We already know what that is from the state. Similarly, I can't budget more ARPA money than has been committed. So if we want to go with option 4, what I likely would come back with is probably somewhere in the order of $400,000 to $600,000 worth of budget reductions in addition to what we're proposing tonight. I just want to be really, really clear. I don't see a different path to that, and that's still going to leave us having to use ARPA money over time to defray. But that 400,000 number, I think, will have to go up because we don't have the commitment to the right column plus the needs to pay for things that we have to pay for out of revolving accounts like utilities and custodial costs. And I'm going to ask Marie and Dave to maybe check my thinking, but I do think that's the implication of it. So I just want to make sure we're clear about that. Can we do it? Yes. We can come back and say, here's 600,000 more, 5, 6, 7, whatever that number is, and we have to crunch that based on available revenues. But I think we're going deeply into some of the educational program that we have in other areas. So, that's the piece that I just want to make sure we're clear about. That's the balance and trade-off, because at the end of all of it, we still have to balance the budget in this one community. And it's beyond my scope and purview to be able to talk about what the right balance of town versus school budgets is.
And, my observation is that the number Peter came back with is not the number that's associated with classroom assistance. It's beyond that. And so to sort of respond to Ginny, and I want to continue this discussion after we go through question and answers. We're going to have more time on this, but I want to respond to Ginny's comment, which is it half-day kindergarten or half-day 5th grade? No, it's full-day kindergarten and it's full-day 5th grade, but it's 5th grade classes of 25 students, or it's larger classrooms. It's not just having kindergarten and getting rid of assistance. The ask that we're making here, which is an important one, and that's why I want to continue to discuss it, but it's not just it's not a one-for-one trade. There's going to be other sacrifices. And then we also have to recognize that it's not just a one-time thing, right? We're significantly adding to our annual budget, and then our annual increase becomes harder. And we've talked about health insurance costs going up, towns at its level. Like, it's the decision we make tonight regarding that is one that actually affects us for many years moving forward, in that we may have to make further cuts in future years. So I want everybody to digest that. Like I said, we'll continue to discuss this. I want to hold here and anyone in the room who has questions, that's what I want to get out now. I want to tease out questions, and I want to have a further discussion about this later on the committee. Questions, yeah?
So my question to you, Peter, is what would it take to get to scenario 4 with the necessary cuts needed, notwithstanding the ARPA cap that we have? Plain and simple, what are we looking at in terms of cuts to staff in order to make it to happen?
Dave, do you want to jump in?
So there's two ways to answer that. One's quantitatively in dollars and one's qualitatively in what is behind the dollars. But if you go back to scenario 2, let's just look at, hold it on here. So scenario 4 requires $900,000, 400 of budget increase and 500 of ARPA. Scenario 2 requires 180 budget, one more back, 180 of budget increase and 200 of ARPA. So mathematically, 380 from 900, $520,000. $520,000 or more of budget cuts, more reserves used. That's the numbers. What would be, who are the faces or the things behind those numbers?
So the difference between option 2 and option 4 is an additional, what we had on here was an additional roughly $500,000 of ARPA money, which is not available as far as we know, and an additional $220 in the budget. So $720,000. Now, if what I think I've heard is go further in assistance, but there's a limit to that as well. So we've already got, I'm going to call it grades 5 and 6 just for the sake of argument, but principals may divide it up differently. So we've already got grades 5 and 6 out in this budget. The grades 5 and 6 classroom assistants also do lunch and recess for grades 5 and 6. So at some point, if you keep cutting assistants in this 1 year, you've got to add back lunch and recess aides, which we don't have anymore. So that's roughly another grade level. So now you're talking, even in the current budget, we're down grades 3, 4, and 5. That only leaves grades 1 and 2. So there's only another 360 available. So even just to get to the 220, even if you could get another 500 in ARPA, you basically have almost no assistance grades 1 through 6. Maybe you could squeak out first grade. So we don't think there's another 500,000 in ARPA to be had. So that's something in between. Another 500,000 in cuts, I don't even know where to begin. I will tell you, we've cut 3 teachers at the high school. If you're reducing, the more gradually you can do it, the better. So if we cut a teacher in a department at the high school, if you cut a second teacher in the same department, we've now covered pretty much all the departments once. Now you're talking teachers who teach different disciplines within a department. So, you know, are you cutting another Spanish teacher or a third Spanish teacher, or are we getting rid of French altogether? And I don't believe I even just said that out loud. I'm just totally rhetorically, you know, you're dividing.
We are not getting rid of French altogether. I want to be clear about that. So don't email me. That's not the goal.
I really didn't mean that. My point was that within departments, there are disciplines, and you can't just cut all of one, you know, point two of each discipline.
Just to add to that, Marie mentioned doing it gradually, and she had mentioned before about unemployment issues. The steeper you cut in a discipline, you have the potential to have to pay unemployment costs, which is you think you're cutting X, but you're only cutting a fraction of X because you owe an unemployment claim afterwards.
I would say, you know, the piece that we need some time to come up with what the real number would be, to be honest, because as we've looked at how to bring ARPA money into the district through revenue replacement and replenish some of the ComEd reserves, that's actually funding a lot of what I showed you in the very first presentation I showed, which is how do we expand DEI leadership at the schools? How do we continue with coaching for leadership and expand that? How are we paying for social emotional, professional learning and all of the work that we want to do in those areas? We're able to do that next year because of revenue replacement. And so if we say we're not going to use it as revenue replacement and we're going to use it toward all-day K, we also have to say those funds now are no longer going to be available for that. And that's, I think, the challenge that we have. We're going to make trade-offs. And if it is 100% the committee's purview to determine what that priority is, and I absolutely respect that, and we'll do whatever the goal is. But I just want to make sure there's a really clear understanding that it definitely will have an impact on what we're able to do. And it will have a strategic impact on other priorities that we want to try and move forward as well. I would actually say, we have all of our we have a good number of our elementary principals here. So in terms of talking about like, what would operationally that look like, they may be able to give a little bit of an assessment. I know Lynn and Dana have been doing this for years, and they have a really deep understanding of what their assistants do in the building and how they provide coverage. They can certainly talk to that as well. Again, I unashamedly say I will always prioritize licensed certified staff over non-licensed staff. I can't apologize for that. It's what I do and how I think. But I do also want to recognize that our assistants provide a service in our classrooms direct with students. And in addition, they also provide a lot of coverage in our schools for things that we might not otherwise think of. And I know we had that discussion last year. We've had it already this year. I just don't want to make it I don't want to make it too simple of an argument, because sometimes when the argument is too simple, we're not really thinking of all the implications and nuances to that. So Adam, I defer to you if you want to hear from any elementary principals or specific questions for the principals, but they're certainly here for that reason.
I'm looking around the committee to see if there's interest all right, I'm seeing some nods. So if maybe one of the elementary principals wants to get prepared to answer the question about what it looks like to reduce the number of assistants while Nora asks her question.
I think this is a question. I'll try to frame it as a question. So next month, on March 11th, it's the 2-year anniversary of when we first went into the whole COVID lockdown. And so as I'm listening to the committee talk about our priorities and what's important to us in the short and long term, the one thing I keep thinking about is how stressed our teachers are. And all of the people who are working in the school buildings are overwhelmed after 2 years of a pandemic, and the kids are all feeling it, families are feeling it, and teachers are feeling it. So I would be in support of scenario 2, much as it pains me not to move more quickly toward all-day K in light of the pandemic that hopefully we're starting to emerge from. But I would be really hesitant to take away anything else from the schools that makes teachers feel less supported across all of the districts. And, I'm looking at even just the faculty support center. Reducing the faculty support center to part-time faculty members, that is something that can add to the stress of teachers. Taking away clerical support at the junior high school, that's something that adds to the stress of teachers. So I'm just balancing that with this need for all-day K. And I would be really, I'm really pleased at how hard you've worked in the budget to keep the things there that feel incredibly necessary at this point in history. And this is a difficult but a 3-year wait to get where we've been wanting to get to for a long time. So
You didn't have a question.
don't have a
but thank you.
question.
Thanks, Nora. Lynn or Dana and any of the elementary teachers, you want to come up and sort of tell us what it might look like?
Andrew. Good evening, everyone. So the classroom assistants do play a really critical role. So it's something that we need to think about. Specifically, the assistants, in addition to covering lunch and recess every day, so that would be a requirement, as Peter suggested earlier, it's contractual, so we know that that would be something we would need to do. Years ago, we had 4 lunch recess aides, and then they worked to cover the lunch and recesses. It's a very different model than what we have now, because at this time, the assistants work directly in those classrooms. So when you think about assistants going out to lunch and recess, you know that they know the kids. And so when there are incidences outside, they're able to work through them in the classroom and together. So it's a very different model. I've lived through both models, and I can tell you that the model we have currently is the most efficient model. Now, that said, if we're looking at what role do they play in the classroom, when you're in a primary classroom, and as we've talked about, the kids who haven't been in kindergarten or preschool, 1st and 2nd grade is not what it used to look like, right? So the assistants definitely play an important role in small group instruction. When you're a teacher and you have 20, 22 students and you're in the classroom alone, it looks different. 1st graders just don't work independently in their small groups. So there is a tremendous value in what the assistants are doing in classrooms.
Thank you, Lynn. Any other questions from the committee? Yevon.
So regarding, ODK, I would say, I still remember last year, this committee also discussed about the plan about phase out the tuition, right, for the kindergarten. So I would say this option 2 is the district already take into account of the need of the, say, the economically disadvantaged people, those subgroups impacted by the COVID. So we are already accelerate the pace of towards the all-day K, free all-day K. So I'll be in favor of this. I mean, so that's one. So the second part is I have a question. Like, so here we are going to cut 3 FTE in high school. So I just wanted to make sure there's losing 3 FTE in the high school is not going to affect the learning experience or lower the quality of the high school student experience, and it's not going to cut the curriculum, only just to say the impact is basically is under control. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, so, I think we looked at it because high school class sizes right now are very low compared to what they have been over multiple years. So I think one thing, and I'll let Joni see if she wants to speak to this too, but if you have a very small high school and you have 4 English teachers and you reduce 1, and you have to redistribute students to the other 3, there's a very significant impact. But in a larger school, say you have 15 or 16 teachers in the department and you reduce 1, you're not significantly increasing class sizes as a result of that. So I think overall we felt pretty comfortable with that change, but Jody, I don't know if you want to kind of speak to what you see as the impact.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I don't have much more to say. I think that 3 overall is reasonable in terms of our class sizes right now. I can't remember who was speaking about it earlier, but once you start to get into more cuts than that in subjects like in science and world language, with disciplines within disciplines, right? As it was Marie, right? Speaking about the languages, or if you're talking about biology teachers and chemistry teachers, if you cut one of them, now that's a department of 3 or 4, and that's much more challenging. But based on our class sizes, I think that, the overall impact on the quality of instruction is something that we feel is reasonable to absorb this year, and, would not greatly affect the quality of education. I wouldn't want to go much more than that in a year, right?
Thanks, Johnny. I feel like I'm going to channel my inner elementary school principal here. John, is it a question or a comment?
Well, I want to change topics a little bit.
Okay, I don't want to change topics. I
But
want
to
move us
reserves, I
forward.
mean, we're still in this section. Dave talked about reserves, and I'd like to
Okay.
take us
I'm going to
back
give
there.
us about 3 more minutes in this Q&A time, and then I want to move us to a break. So if your question is a question about reserves, go ahead.
Indeed, it is. So Dave, in his presentation, commented that he had constructed his slide such that FY22 showed no net use of reserves, thinking perhaps that I wouldn't notice that. And so my question for Dave is, for the purposes of discussion at ALG tomorrow, may we make the assumption that the net use of reserves for FY22 will be no more than $300,000?
Short answer, sure.
Great. Okay, any other questions? All right, Steve, I'm going to recognize you. Given the fact that you've emailed the committee pretty frequently already the past few days, I'm going to give you just a minute to make your point, and then that will be it, and we'll take our break.
I actually had questions, not points, so hopefully for Dave and for Peter. First, since we're looking at this, just trying to understand, I understand there's 1.8 to 2.3 million committed so far by the two towns, 375,000 for Boxborough and 1.5 million with 500,000 in reserve from Acton at this point. So you have the difference between scenario 2 and 4 is you're using 500,000 from ARPA over 3 years that has to be committed in the next 2 years under scenario 2, or 850 under scenario 4. So you said there was a $500,000 difference, or 520, in what you're using for ARPA for ADK for these two. So where's the rest of that money going? I mean, so it's not like you have 850 and that's it. You have 1.8 to 2.3, and maybe more if you can get the towns to give more, which I hope. But you're allocating the ARPA to something else. So where's the rest of that if you're going to spend only the 400 over the 3 years?
All right, thanks, Steve.
That's one question.
Yeah,
And then,
that's the question. We don't
That's
have
it?
time
Okay.
to continue on, so we'll
So-
let
All
the
right.
administration.
Yeah, and I can talk to that. So one of the earlier iterations of the budgets that we had actually allocated, I'm going to say maybe 350 to 375,000, somewhere around that. We had pulled out of community education revolving accounts and put it into the operating budget. And I apologize, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. Does that feel about right, Dave? Okay. Because we were able to focus that into and use the ARPA money, when the final rule changed in the federal government, we could use it for revenue replacement. We were able to replenish the revolving accounts for community education to a level that they could continue to carry that $350,000 to $375,000 a year. That then freed up budget money for us to be able to pay for things like some of the expanded professional learning and other opportunities that we wanted. So that's really, and that's not just a one-time use. That 375,000 only happens 1 year, and then it has to happen again, and it has to happen again, in order to not then further reduce the operating budget. So, if we choose to use ARPA money for a different function, then we have to not count on that 300, whatever it is, and instead bring that into the operating budget, which means we have to reduce other areas. Hopefully that answers.
yeah, so I think that should be the question then, because that seems to
All
be the
right,
difference.
thank you. That's
Thank
all
you.
we have time for. We're going to take our break now. It's 8:40. We're going to come back at 8:50, please. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for promptly returning at 11 minutes. I'll give it to you. Thank you. We're going to move on to our presentation number 5 on district benchmarking and our comparable communities. That one is with you, Peter.
All right, so thank you, Adam. So one of the tools that I've used over the years it's on the DESE website. This is publicly available. It's called Radar, which stands for Resource Allocation and District Action Reports. I'm going to say it's a useful tool to be able to understand kind of how your district spends money, but also how your district spends money relative to other similar districts. If you want to go play in the sandbox, you're welcome to. This is an online tool. Frustratingly, DESE has made it fully online. You now can't download the information yourself, save it, manipulate it, and everything, so it's kind of challenging, but it is useful. What I have done the last few years is to go give an overview of our comparable communities and how we spend money relative to some of our comp communities. The comp communities were not developed by me. This is a report that goes back to 2015, and I believe it was initiated in dialogue between the school committee and the finance committees of the 2 towns to understand, based on a range of criteria and metrics, who else in the state is comparable to Acton Boxborough. I think it has probably shifted over time, and I question the validity now of some of the 2015 data. However, I don't want to just be making up my own metrics. DESE, if you go into this tool, will give you its own set of communities that it believes are comparable based on 2 criteria, either the demographics of your community or the wealth of your community. So you can actually see based on both what comparable communities look like. There's some overlap to what I'm going to present to you tonight from the 2015 Comp Communities report, but there's also some differences. I would like to maybe see us move toward just using DESE's comps for both wealth and demographics, because I think it would overall be a better indicator, but I don't want to do that without intentionally having that conversation with you. So for tonight, we're using the the locally developed comp communities list. I exclude Concord, Carlisle, and Sudbury and Lincoln Sudbury because they are not fully regionalized, and that's going to skew however we look at their data. So as we've discussed before, a couple things that come out of this, and I apologize that it's small, it just doesn't project well, but our enrollment has declined to the tune of about 7% over the last 5 years. Our special education numbers have declined 1%. They have fluctuated. I think historically they had been around 15. They climbed to 16%. We're down to 15. But we've been roughly in the same area for a few years. The major changes in our district have been in the increase in English learners and also the increase in students who are economically disadvantaged. When I think Kira referenced that we are a suburban district that has urban issues, that's what she's talking about. That, who we think we've educated or are educating has shifted over time, and we need to recognize that in the program we put forward. I also want to reflect that as you looked at Marie's staffing slide to what we've been adding in terms of staff over the last few years, EL educators, additional special educators, counselors, psychologists. I mean, everything we've added was really an equity-focused service. Similarly with Mtss and looking at tiered systems of support in both academic and social emotional learning, that really speaks to what we're trying to make sure that our educational program reflects the students we serve. We have grown in both leadership and teachers. We believe that a lot of the leadership numbers are attributable actually in special education. And if you look at 2021, we have to be cautious about that data. That was the pandemic year. We also added a remote program that had several administrators and a coordinator for special education. So you're going to see numbers kind of artificially inflate in 2021. I also caution as I get into comparisons between districts, some districts clearly just are not coding their data the same way among districts. And so, you have to take trends for what they are and make some judgments based on that, but you can't take it as gospel, would be my message there. This is the list of comp districts, and again, I know it's challenging to see, but our districts are Belmont, Dedham, Hingham, Marblehead, Milton, Neshoba, which is a regional district. Needham, Reading, Wachusett, another regional district. I do question, that's one I certainly question about comparability. Wellesley, Westford, Weston, I would question that one as well. Wilmington and Winchester, all right? So there's some outliers, but that's what we have. If you want to take a look at these slides, they've been in the budget binder. You can kind of dig in and take a look at all sorts of areas. The interesting column to me is relative district wealth. That will allow you to compare the relative wealth of districts or their ability to fund education. We typically are at that 85% mark, but you can see, you know, like a Belmont is up at the 123% mark. So the relative wealth of Belmont compared to AB is striking. And you can get a sense of that across your districts. This will allow you to look at numbers for, you know, students who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English learners, and then look at some performance metrics based on MCAS. MCAS performance metrics are not really all that valid right now because of the pandemic and the lack of testing and modifications to testing. So I would really caution on MCAS metrics. I'm just going to go through categories of staffing relative to some of our comp communities. For all of the work we've done to increase the number of licensed educators, we have gotten to that glorious place of just below average in terms of FTEs per 100 students. I think, I forget what I said when I was at Finance Committee, I didn't bring that number with me, but I think out of the communities, we are like, I don't know, we're below whatever the median would be in terms of teachers per student. Blue line is always kind of the line of best fit for Acton Boxborough. We're pretty similar to Winchester, but you can kind of get a sense of it. Special educators are in orange, and general education teachers are in yellow on this. English language education teachers are the bottom of the chart. They're in the red. It's a little harder to see because there's not as many per capita. And then what we do not have are vocational teachers because we don't have a vocational program in district. Paraprofessionals is the one area where, comparable to other communities, we do spend a considerable amount of money. That is just, you can kind of get a sense of it here. This is the one area where we are comparable to Wellesley, to Weston, you know, and some of those other wealthier districts that have more money to spend on education than we do. Leadership. This is an interesting one. We are maybe a little bit above average in leadership. The low, light blue area at the bottom is district leadership. The darker blue area in the middle is district instructional leaders compared to other communities, and the gray area is school leaders. We believe special education coordinators are coded as school leaders, so that's why, as we've added that, over time, you're going to see that change. This is also, I believe, reflective of remote academy staffing levels from last year, so just to consider that as well. If you want to compare the numbers, it's a lot more readable on the charts in your packet, but you can kind of see, you know, we are pretty much average for district leaders. We're pretty much average for instructional leaders, and we're a little bit above average for school leaders. Student support, in terms of special ed and non-special education, student support. I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. This is, student support is going to be counseling, psychological services, things like that. So you can kind of get a sense. This is an area that we're doing pretty well compared to our comps. Clerical and technical support. You know, we might be a little bit high on the clerical side, but not, you know, in a significant way. Tech support, you know, would be nice to be Weston. Right? So, but we're not, that's why they might be an outlier that probably could be removed from this list. Spending, I'll go through this, and this is one where you don't have to try and read all the numbers. I'm just going to go through the categories. What I've done on this chart, I have highlighted in blue whatever the median community would be. There are 15 communities on the list. When it comes to total spending per student, we are the median of our comparable communities, which generally is probably about where you want to be if you're a community member. If you're a school personnel, you probably want to be Weston. So, I want to recognize the tension that we might have and say that it is real. I'm going to go through some of the other categories so you can get a sense. Orange is always Acton Boxborough. Again, the blue box is always the median community. So administration, we're just below the median community. Instructional leadership, we're slightly above the median. For teachers, we're a little bit below the median. Other teaching services are paraprofessionals and substitute teachers. So that's the one area where we're well above the median. The professional development, we're below median. Instructional materials, we're slightly below median. Guidance and psychology, we're slightly above the median. Pupil services, we are third from the top in that. And so does everyone know what pupil services? That would be special education generally, English language learning. Operations and maintenance, third from the bottom. And then benefits and fixed costs, we're just about median. All right, so I would not take any one data point here for gospel because it's so dependent on each district and how they code all of their expenses as they put them in through their accounting systems and through their personnel systems. So for example, I think Wachusett, if you look back at their slide in detail, it appears they have no special educators in the district. So clearly that's a data coding error. So something happened there, we don't know what. We'll never be able to explain it away. I'm sure there's data in our system that we've somehow coded differently. This is very, very macro level. But to me, when I look at this information, I look for outliers. And as we talk about, okay, if we want to think about how are we going to fund something that we don't currently do, what we can look at is, all right, where are we an outlier? And if we're significantly underfunded in an area, that's probably not the first place to look. But if we seem to be overfunded in an area relative to peers, that could be an opportunity to look at. So that has somehow informed my decision-making along the way. I don't think you need to get too deep into it, but I do think it's helpful every once in a while to get up on that balcony at the 20,000-foot view and kind of take a look at how we spend our money. So hopefully that was informative. And not too in the weeds for that type of a presentation.
Thank you, Peter. Questions for Peter on benchmarking comparable communities? We're going to stick with questions, and then we're going to go to comments. Andrew.
Yeah, just a question about the way that you were showing this. I recognize the median being a way of managing the spend across these things. But is there another way of being able to look at the quality of what the outcomes are based on the spends, or is there another way of being able to filter this out to say that this segment has a better outcome versus that segment, and whether you'd want to be even at the bottom of a higher segment rather than where you are? And it's more a question of how the statistics are played out and what could be presented.
That's a great question. I think that's the goal. Prior to this year, this report was in a downloadable Excel file that you could save and manipulate and pull different data tables in. Now it's only online. You can't do anything with the report other than view it. So I couldn't even sort columns to present to you. So it was really a challenge to think of doing this. I do think when we look at any kind of data like this, this is so macro level that all you can really do out of data like this is think of the questions that you want to ask that would cause you to dig into something in a deeper way. I think, if we looked at instructional leadership, for example, I would go to Deb and I would say, Deb, all right, let's get on the, ed.gov, research sites. Let's pull all the evidence around what instructional leadership does in terms of student performance. And in all honesty, that is the largest driver. For years in instructional leadership, we were one of the bottom districts. Yet all the research points to coaching is actually the most impactful thing you can do to improve student performance. So that's an area that we've intentionally tried to build out and make sure that we were at least comparable, if that makes sense. But there's no great way to manipulate this.
Yeah, it does, and that's actually leaning towards what would make this more valuable in any discussion that we have, to understand the value of the spend that's going through, to be able to create the outcomes we're looking for, and understanding how to better manage what we're doing against these other communities. So thanks.
Definitely. If we were funded the way medical fields are, we would certainly have those data systems, but unfortunately, they don't fund education the same way.
We're finding that out across the board tonight.
Thank you. John?
So I love numbers, but as you said, when you have this kind of data, there's problems looking at it. So I was wondering if we could take a minute and go back to slide 74, where Marie emphasized, where we had invested as we had grown staff. And if you could comment, again, in a qualitative way, about where these things stand relative to other districts, and, whether, some of these things have reached levels that say, yes, I'm comfortable with this level of staffing, or some of these things still need more emphasis as we go forward.
Sure. I mean, I can give you my personal opinion, and I think, Marie could give you hers, Deb, Andrew, Jen. I mean, really, any of our leadership can feel free to chime in on this answer. I think through this work on this slide, we've gotten to a place where we now are comparable. And we're providing a level of service that's comparable to other communities like us. And I think that's why I kind of showed the median community. And again, it's not the best, but it's what we have in this version. And so if we're somewhere around the median, you can make some reasonable assumptions that, okay, we're probably pretty close. If we're well below the median, like in capital spending, all right, that's certainly something we want to take a look at and figure out why we're not there. And if we're well above a median, we can say, all right, what are we doing that would cause us to be above the median? And there are ways to either be more efficient or more effective that we can look at. So, I think that in particular in special education, because it is one that came up that's an area we were above the median, but I'll also say there are dozens and dozens of students now in our district who are able to attend our schools that might have been placed outside of our schools previously. That is never going to show up in a metric, but it certainly shows up in the life experiences of our kids and their ability to connect to the home environment and do so in an inclusive way. I don't ever want to downplay that you can't measure that, right? You can measure the return on investment that can come of it in avoided cost, and we saw that where the lone bright spot of our budget this year was in special education out-of-district tuitions, which came in at, I think, $250,000 lower than what we had previously spent. So there's a measure of that. English language educators, I think when we look at our populations, one of the things that, and this ties into kind of the overall district strategy of what we're trying to do, whether it's English language educators, special educators, and a lot of the DEI work that we need to do around equity, it's all tied together. And, I believe I've shared this with you, but we were cited for disproportionality and the over-identification of populations for special education services and IEPs. That work lives in the anti-bias work that we do. The work lives in the DEI work and culturally responsive schools work. It certainly lives in all of this MTSS work, because if you do not have effective screening tools and tiered systems of support that are evidence-based, you will end up having to go with kind of that gut instinct. And what we know is everyone's gut instinct is somehow biased. So, there's certainly reasons why we've been intentional in building out this staff list to address some of those issues that we have. Some mean that we might appear like, someone might look at it and say, wow, geez, I think you're overfunding that category. That's only the start of that analysis. But I think looking at how we've either served or underserved students historically speaks to why we're doing this work here. So I think that was a long-winded answer. I'm not 100% sure I got to it, but hopefully that was close enough for Jazz.
It was exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
It's 9:10. We have officially aligned with our agenda schedule. So I want to do some level setting here in terms of what our expectations should be for the next 35 or so minutes. First, I do want to extend a huge thanks to the district administration, to Peter, to Marie, to Dave, to everybody who helped support putting together all these materials, and doing so on an extremely compressed timeline. This is the fastest that a budget binder has ever gone out. So first and foremost, thank you guys for an amazing presentation, and thank you for saving the millions of trees that would have died had we printed out the budget binders this year. So that's first, thank you. So bottom line, and John will agree with me on this, what we do is we vote a top-line budget. So before we leave tonight, we have we have a couple votes, but the two most important votes are what is that top-line number? And the second is, what is our tuition for all-day K? Those are the two most important things that we're going to do. And I mention that because I feel like we could very quickly and very easily get into the weeds of picking and choosing what happens to get to the things that we actually want. And I don't think 9 o'clock at night after all the presentations is the right time to be doing that, nor is it fair to our administration to try and crunch all those numbers now. So what we should be discussing now and what we should be considering is if the budget of $102 million, $103 million if I round up, a 3.19% increase is something that we believe is a reasonable budget, one that we think both will serve the needs of our students, but also be within the financial means of our communities. If we believe that's correct, then we need to vote that. We need to at least begin to give that direction moving forward, knowing we have ALG tomorrow. I want to recognize that very early in this meeting, Peter went over what our budget goals were and what our goals that we voted for the district were, and they were not exclusively all-day K, right? They were to really address a lot of the disproportionate outcomes that we saw in the data over the past few years. So with that, I'm happy to begin having some discussion from the committee in terms of where we think we're at with this budget number as a top line, and then maybe some guidance towards the administration about how we massage inside that total number what we want to see for next year. I'll open the floor up now. Yeah, Marie.
Just a technicality so that you're aware of this. The vote tonight is the one vote of the year that's not a weighted vote by your normal voting standards. So this is the preliminary budget vote. It needs to be voted actually tonight. It can't go up after that. And in order to pass, it needs a majority of the members of each town that are present. So it needs 2 out of 3 Boxborough members and 4 out of 7 Acton members to pass. So I just thought you should know that.
Thank you. Yeah, Amy.
Is the kindergarten tuition a weighted vote? Or is it just a straight vote?
Yes,
It is
that
weighted?
would be weighted.
It's weighted, okay.
Yeah.
Can I clarify one thing? They're two separate votes, right? So the first vote we're going to ask you to take is all-day K tuition. And I believe the wording of the motion that Beth provided put blanks in for the numbers, because that's your discretion in making that motion. If you vote $1,800 and this budget, those two in two separate votes, then essentially that's the recommended budget. If you vote option 4 to go to $0, the budget on the table still is this budget. And what that will do is that will trigger us to make whatever reductions we need to on our side to get to that same budget number. Is everyone clear on that process? I just want to make sure we understand like the two triggers. So the budget number doesn't have to change. What the all-day K tuition vote is actually independent of your vote on the budget number. It will cause consequences, but not change the budget number.
But are we able to change that number?
The budget number?
I started having conversations instead of the meeting rules. It's late. So the kindergarten vote, tuition vote, is that something we can change before we, or at, next meeting or the following meeting, or are we locked in? And I understand the timing is, parents need to know, but are we locked in tonight?
I mean, once you vote it, we'll notify families. I mean, I hesitate to say this, do you have to vote it tonight? I mean, it very directly impacts your budget vote, so it would be hard for us to know what to do with the budget if you don't vote all day K.
Yep.
But
We need to know what we're doing with this. I hate to say it, we only have a month to get to a final budget, and we have an ALG process. We have to know what we're
We
doing
have to
with this
vote the budget tonight,
Yeah,
and we
really
have
do.
to vote, well, first we have to vote all day K.
Correct,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Okay, comments or thoughts on all day K? Where are we leaning towards? I will pull up this quote that I looked up before. A good compromise is when both parties are dissatisfied. We'll attribute that to Larry David. I believe that option 2 is that good compromise. No one's going to be happy, but we're going to have a significant reduction in the cost of tuition for those students. We still do have scholarships available, and we will still make a pretty deep cut to the assistant staffing. No one's going to be happy, but we're going to come in at a budget that looks like is something that's tenable for the communities. Amy, and then Tessa.
Yeah, so listening to all the conversations tonight, I really do have to agree with you. I don't see a feasible way to get to free all-day K and without doing some real damage. So I'm sorry to say this, but I would go with option 2.
I don't want you to cut the, assistance any further than the 2 levels. I wish we would stop looking at it from the perspective of free all-day K as if it's like a gift that we're giving. Because what I really feel like is that this is something that we are keeping away from students and a discrepancy, we were cited for a discrepancy in whatever. I believe that when Marie presented all this stuff originally, that there was a discrepancy in the racial makeup of half-day versus full-day. There was a discrepancy in the disability makeup of half-day versus full-day. And we know that there's a discrepancy in the socioeconomic differences between half-day and full-day. And I don't want to cut teachers. I am a teacher. I don't want to cut teachers, but I just don't understand. Option 2 wouldn't be so abhorrent to me if it weren't for 3 years. 3 years is a ridiculously long time. 3 years is a long time, and I understand not wanting to saddle us in the future with all of these other expenses, but the thing is that we're going to continue to lose kids to programs like Minuteman Tech. I mean, you play it out along the lines, right? Like, you don't provide the equitable services when kids are younger, and then it just builds. The gaps get wider, and, I'm saying this from personal experience, the gaps get wider, and my kids went to full day K. We're constantly doing a disservice to the most vulnerable members of our educational community, and there has to be another way. I understand I understand we can't commit to using ARPA funds that we don't have, but the budget slide you showed us said 500 is a $220,000 gap, not a $720, budget gap, not a $720,000 budget gap. They can give us more ARPA funds. It's conflating those 2 numbers. The slide said $220,000 budget and $500,000 ARPA. I understand. I don't sit on the budget committee anymore. I haven't sat in all of those conversations. There just has to be another way to find, either it's them giving us more money and us finding a different way to do it. I'm not suggesting we like totally eliminate all of our regular education assistants. I work in a school. I understand how we have to have lunch and recess and all of that other stuff, but I don't know how we're true to our goals of equity for the most vulnerable kids without doing all-day K this year or next year. $1,800 is great. It's not so horrible, but for 3 more years, I mean, and the communities that don't have full day K are dwindling. Westford voted last night to have full day K next year. So I don't know. I stay with option 4. Find the money somewhere.
Thank you. I just want to note that we have received emails from families who do not qualify for assistance with all-day kindergarten tuition and find it to be an extreme burden. So I just want to say that, you know, we can't just say there's assistance programs because $1,800 is still a lot of money for many families to shoulder. And I also just want to note that our class sizes have come down, our enrollment is going down, and you know, there may be room to think about having, you know, class sizes that average 1 or 2 kids larger in order to get this done more quickly. I cannot swallow the 3-year horizon here. We're one of a tiny handful of communities who somehow hasn't figured this out. It's making my head explode. We're even still arguing about this. That's all I'll say.
John.
I'm going to go back to Peter's, radar report, which showed the wealth of our community at 85%. And, to Peter's comment that the numbers, don't always tell the whole story, that number would be right if we actually, taxed both communities equally, but we don't. So the actual number in terms of our ability to support education with the current regional agreement is less than that 85%. So I hear why everybody says, oh, we should be able to do X, Y, Z. But the answer is there really is a financial constraint. So I get the pain. I, in 2008, was sitting in the audience of the school committee, and I had sent the school committee a letter that said, how can it be that you have a policy that limits class sizes to 24, and yet you have classes of 27 and 28 students? And I said, you need to do one of 2 things. Either 1, you need to change your policy, or 2, you need to reduce your class size. And of course, the committee, ignored the letter, which was sensible because they really did want to be at that class size, and they really had no mechanism to fund smaller class sizes, so they had to sit with it. And, it's painful that we have to sit with this, but, I think unless we can be successful with the legislature, and I think, if eloquence will get us there, I'm confident Kira will release monies that will actually finally resolve this problem. Until we can get that kind of money, this is just going to be a challenge.
Ben.
So in reviewing the budgets and the 2 proposals, I have grave concerns about what proposal number 4 will do to our schools in the next several years. While I would love to get to all-day K next year, I'd love to get to all-day K right now and just say, forget, any additional fees and costs associated with it. If the potential is there to continue to cut at a certified staff level, I don't know what type of damage we will do in, future years to our students if we do not afford them the same opportunities as students have today in our schools. So this is not an easy task. This is not something that I don't think any of us here wanted to be sitting through tonight to say, okay, do we want to put the burden on our youngest learners, or do we want to put the burden on our students moving forward who may not be able to afford, not financially, but may not be able to afford the opportunity to have the same opportunities as students today have in our schools. And that's concerning to me too.
Thank you. Kira?
Thank you. So I want to speak to two narratives. The first is that I want to make sure that anybody who's listening tonight sees this discussion, because there's going to be a narrative tomorrow after we maybe choose the option that is economically most practical to go with option 2, which I will likely vote for. And that's going to say that we rubber stamped this, we didn't think about it, we were so careless and not thoughtful. So, here are all of these humans. Here are great humans who have been doing very hard work. Here is the culmination of many months of work in budget sub, in this room, and here now. So this is not a rubber stamp vote. This is an excruciating vote we're about to take. So that's the first narrative. The second narrative is I'm really grateful that Peter put up the radar numbers, because there's this other adorable narrative where we have a structural problem that we are not taking care of, that we are poor stewards of this $100 million budget. And what y'all just saw was that, we can show that we're often in the middle of the pack. And when we're not, we're thinking about why. And yes, Andrew is right about the quality versus the quantity, but even then, we're thinking about that and trying to account for it. So the years of stewardship have been good and thoughtful. The hours and months of stewardship that are going to result in this excruciating vote has been thoughtful. So, don't believe the hype on Facebook tomorrow. That's that. But then the final thing is that, Mr. Peterson is right. But it's not going to be about eloquence. I just want to make sure that the record shows we're doing all of this work here. We're going to fight at ALG tomorrow. But we have a state house need, and we have a federal need. And I want the record to show the plea that we have representatives in the State House who could be nourishing this community with more aid, who have not necessarily delivered on that. So we're going to bring this excruciating vote to this table and to this record, and it is because we are not being nourished in other areas. So again, if you're a person who works at the State House representing these two communities, please know about this excruciating vote. If you are a person who wants to go to the State House representing these two communities, I'm deadly serious. I hope you're watching this meeting. I hope you watch and care about this excruciating vote. Because next fiscal year, we're going to have this fight about the 2-year horizon instead of the 3-year horizon. It doesn't have to be this way. It really honestly doesn't. So, Beth, I hope you got it. And, I hope that's what's on Facebook tomorrow, because that's really important. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kara. All right, I want to go in the Wayback Machine when in 2020 we voted the current kindergarten plan, and I remember this committee struggled with that and wanting to commit future committees to a more aggressive or a less aggressive timeline. And we crafted our motion very carefully to say the committee at that point was committed to getting to free all-day K. And if you look at slide 87, scenario 1, that's what we voted. And if you look at slide 88, scenario 2, we're considering a significant change to that. And I think, and I've said this to Peter and Marie many times, we have to celebrate the wins. This is a win to get from what would have been $3,000 a year of tuition to $1,800. That's a win. That's an improvement. And voting $1,800 today does not commit future committees to vote $1,800 next year. Just like we're going to vote this year to go against the plan that we voted 3 years ago. That's a win too. We have the opportunity next year. We have the opportunity to live today to fight tomorrow for better outcomes, for more support from our State House and our communities to get to the 0 all-day K, and in a more aggressive timeline. So Voting today does not commit us to 3 years. Voting today is doing just one thing, which is saying to the community, this is really important, and we're going to cut the price in half of what we told you before it was going to be, and that's a win. It's not a full win. We're not getting to free all-day K, but we're getting much closer. Any other comments? Anybody else want to have a question or make a motion? Go ahead, Yevon.
Oh, I just have a quick comment. So that's actually exactly the first comment that Adam already made it, right? So I remember still we made a unanimous vote actually on the original plan. So right now the option 2 is kind of we listen, the district team listen to the community's voice and make adjustments. So we already accelerate the pace towards a free all-day K kindergarten. I would say that's one comment. Second is, even though there's $1,800, but if I remember correctly, we set aside $50K, right, for the subsidy or scholarship, whatever. So based on the Marie's calculation, so Marie project by lowering the tuition to $1,800, so the enrollment into the all-day K will be 290, right? So right now our projection for the all-day K in the next year is 310, right? Or 315 or whatever. That's all-day K, right? Oh no, that's a kindergarten enrollment. So from 290 towards the 315, that's 25 kids. So I would say 50K is enough to cover those. So we shouldn't. So there's no such thing. Say, this 50K is enough to cover. But that's just my thought. Third one is I would say we have to negotiate in good faith. That's something like, we cannot say we want all. I like free all-day K, because when my kids already, they already go beyond the all-day K, right? But we pay the all-day K tuition like $45K a year. I was always wonder why Lexington kids, they don't need to pay, but I have to pay. But I like that, but I also say this is a hardship. The town has a hardship, and everybody is still try to struggle, try to find a way out of the pandemic. So we needed to stay together and go through it. That's so I would say option 2 is I will be in favor.
Thank you, Yevon. Ben.
So I'm going to do this. Mr. Chairman, I would like to move to set the all-day kindergarten tuition for FY23 at $1,800 as outlined in option number 2 of tonight's budget slides.
Second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Ginny and Tessa, thank you. Any abstentions? Nope. That does pass. Thank you all. All right, on to continuing the discussion or the motion for our budget. If someone is so inclined to make the motion, it is fairly formal and.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
I will just say, I know how important all-day kindergarten is to you and the desire to reduce tuition. If we can keep advocating at the state level, and we can find more funds, you can go to the community and say, we're lowering your tuition. No one will complain. You're not going to get emails about that, that are angry. But you can't go back and say, now we're raising your tuition. So, in all honesty, that's why I advocate taking a conservative approach on this, but I didn't want to share that to influence the vote. But it doesn't mean that your advocacy has to end, because I do think, how many billions of dollars of revenue is our state sitting on in surplus, right? we know that that's there. So I would advocate that we should continue to push and see what we can get, because again, we can always go back and lower something, we just can't raise it.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for the invitation to keep on fighting. I'm so grateful.
I didn't need an invitation.
I'm looking forward to it. I move that the total appropriation for the Acton Boxborough Regional School District regular operating budget for the fiscal year of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023 be preliminarily set at $102,899,440, an increase of 3.19%. And that the budget would be funded by member towns to be preliminarily assessed in accordance with the education reform law and the terms of the regional agreement and amendments thereto as follows. Acton, $69,689,255, an increase of 3.18%. And Boxborough, $13,257,674, an increase of 4.59%. Offset by use of E&D reserve in the amount of $1,500,000, with the remainder accounted for by other sources of revenues to be detailed in the final budget vote.
Second.
Thank you very much, Kira. Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will remind us, as Marie did, that per page 7, section 10A of our regional agreement, the preliminary budget shall be approved by a majority of the members of the committee from each member town. So, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you all. All right. Yes, Amy.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate Peter and Marie and the entire administration. I know that we have come back to you multiple times, and you have gone and cut and tried thousands of different ways to come up with, everything that we're asking for. And I really, truly appreciate all of your time. I know it has consumed much of your days, many of your days. You know what I'm saying. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I'll just, if I can, extend that to all of the principals, other central office administrators and leaders, and I know all of their assistant principals and other staff in their buildings are all doing this work too behind the scenes. Tonight was a night where, we knew we needed to get to a place, and we needed to do that efficiently. And so you only heard from the three of us, but I can't understate that all of the work to get there happens with this group of people over here. So I just want to extend my thanks to them and recognize that they're doing all this heavy lifting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, we have just 2 more votes to make. One is what would be a consent agenda item, but since it's only one meeting minutes, approval of meeting minutes from January 27th, 2022, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Moved by Kira, seconded by Amy. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? None. That is unanimous. Thank you. And in gratitude to everybody's thoughtful discussion this evening, I believe I will look for a motion to move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrants as follows. Number P2216, dated January 27th, 2022, in the amount of $2,843,656.08. Number P2217, dated 2/10/2022, in the amount of $2,785,063.08. And payroll deduction warrant as follows. Number 22-016 PR, dated 1/27/2022, in the amount of $1,162,740.27. Number 22-017 PR dated 2/10/2022 in the amount of $548,215.55. Vendor warrants as follows. Number 22-016A dated 1/22/2022 in the amount of $1,553.89. Number 22-016 dated 2/3/2022 in the amount of $1,327,511.37. And student activities warrant as follows. Number 22-017SH dated 2/10/2022 in the amount of $20,253.62.
Seconded.
You're actually moving that.
Oh, so moved.
All right, and Ginny seconded. So, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. I have a Post-it note here before we adjourn. That is to just mention to everybody here that tonight is Rick Deegan's last meeting for ActonTV. After over 20 years with ActonTV, he's moving on to a new position. He is the man behind the door who we've been harassing all evening, and I want to thank him very much for his service. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. That was moved by Tessa, seconded by Amy. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you all very much. 9:42, that's 3 minutes.